Chapter 181, Contribution. As Aunt May had suspected, Parker was out with his girlfriend Anna, but their date was hardly romantic. They were sitting in a dim, secret room lit by a handful of sputtering oil lamps. The weak light barely chased away the shadows. The air smelled stale and a little musty. More than a dozen unfamiliar faces clustered around them in a semicircle, everyone silent and solemn, as though waiting for some kind of rite to begin. Parker, always observant, noticed one absence. The last time he'd attended one of these gatherings, a young man named Norton had sat near the door. Norton wasn't there tonight. The thought planted a small seed of unease, but everyone else seemed used to this, so Parker set it aside and prepared to listen. One by one, the others spoke about their recent experiences. Almost immediately, he realized most of the testimonies were trivial. People gushed about aches disappearing, about sleeping better, brighter skin, more energy. It sounded like overblown advertising. Parker fought a smirk. He thought of the time and effort he spent exercising with Anna and cooking for her. It irked him to hear her credit their changes to anything but that. Anna, for her part, was radiant as she spoke. "I feel like I've become so much more beautiful," she said, eyes shining. "My skin's smoother, my eyes are clearer." Parker bit back a complaining retort. He had hoped for deeper discussion, real insight into the mystics and their powers, and felt the meeting was wasting his time. Just as regret began to settle, the elderly priest at the head of the room turned to him. Priest Hansen was a serious man with thinning gray hair and eyes that seemed to hold more understanding than he let on. "Parker, it's your turn," he said quietly. "Do you have anything to share? Any questions?" Parker hesitated. He had come with questions, but the lightness of the other speeches had made him doubt whether this was the place for them. He steadied himself and asked his planned question. "Mr. Hansen," he said, "how can I tell when the potion in my body has been fully digested?" Hansen smiled, nodded. "A good question," he replied. "Digestion of a potion is a complex, subtle process. It varies from person to person. Generally, though, when your body and mind reach a new peak, when you can use the potion's power more freely and naturally, you'll know it's digested." Parker pressed for more. "But how do I know I've reached that peak?" "There's no single fixed sign," Hansen said. "You learn it through practice and meditation, by paying attention to how you change. Trust your intuition. Observe how your body and reactions adapt. The answer is something you feel as much as see." That was enough for now. Parker left the meeting feeling a little more at ease, though still uncertain. Outside, the night's breeze was fresh and cool, the stars spread bright above them. Walking side by side on the quiet street, Parker felt the hope of a new beginning and the weight of unanswered questions. "By the way," he asked as they walked, "how do you advance to the next sequence once you've digested a potion?" Anna stopped and looked up at the sky as if recalling a lesson. "Priest Hansen said, you need to make a certain contribution to headquarters to be promoted," she said. "Every promotion requires some kind of contribution." "Contribution?" Parker frowned. "Why haven't I heard about this?" "You're still new," Anna explained. "All your contributions go to me right now because I brought you into the church. Once your probation is over and you become a full believer, you'll have your own contributions." Parker thought it through, and the organizational picture fell into place. The church wasn't a single small circle. It had branches and a headquarters, priests like Hansen with subordinates, a hierarchical structure like a pyramid. "There are also the marks on our bodies," Anna added. "They're the bridge to communicate directly with the gods. You need certain rituals to make contact, like when you first came to my place." Parker's memory flashed back. Anna had been intense that night, cutting her fingers and smearing blood on her face for the ritual. He remembered feeling unnerved. "You could have told me earlier," he said, half accusing, half amused. Anna smiled, a little teasing. "Someone tends to wind me up and never lets me finish my sentences," she said, glancing at him. Heat rose to Parker's cheeks. Anna's voice softened. "Why don't you move out of your aunt and uncle's? You're working now. You don't have to live with them. Or you could move in with me." Her suggestion hung in the air like temptation. Parker's heart raced. It was a practical solution in many ways, but he couldn't make such a decision alone. "I'll think about it," he said. "I should at least talk it over with them first." They walked on in silence until Anna's building came into view. After he sent her inside, Parker headed home, the night pressing close around him. When he reached the second-floor bedroom he shared with Aunt May and Uncle Ben, he paused. He thought he heard odd noises downstairs. He wasn't a child anymore. He knew how to be careful. He locked the door, lay on his narrow bed, and stared at the ceiling, while Anna's words and Priest Hansen's advice replayed in his head. Maybe he should move out. It would be better for both him and Uncle Ben, he told himself. There were things he didn't want Uncle Ben or Aunt May to find, secrets and markings that would be hard to explain. Uncle Ben was powerful himself, and Parker didn't want to drag them into anything dangerous. Anna had explained the marks could be used to petition the gods. Sometimes the gods responded directly, rewarding sacrifice with powerful potions. But Parker knew his situation was different. He'd slipped into the Shadow Wilderness and had a chance to pass its trials in the tower, pass the test, and the promotion potion could be granted directly. He didn't need to spend years building contribution points like the others. The fact felt like both a blessing and a warning. Being noticed by the gods might bring favor, but it could also be dangerous. He took a long breath and calmed himself. Getting stronger was the right direction. He had plenty of practice playing a small-time nobody. Maybe he would be promoted sooner than he expected. Back in the secret room, the meeting had not yet broken up. One cloaked man had fallen to his knees before Priest Hansen, imploring in a hoarse voice, "Master Priest, I feel the potion in me has been completely digested. I'm ready for the trial mission. Please, let me go." Hansen regarded him with a patient, gentle expression. "Your contribution value is sufficient for the trial mission," he said slowly. "But you must understand you're asking for something dangerous. Think carefully." The man flung his hands up. "No, I don't need time to think. I can do it. I know I can." Hansen sighed, then rested a hand on the man's shoulder. "Very well," he said, his voice deepening. "Your trial mission is this: create chaos that involves hundreds of people." The cloaked man's face, shadowed beneath his hood, tightened with a mixture of fear and fierce determination. Around him, the others exchanged looks, the gravity of Hansen's words settling over the room like a cold cloak. Chapter 182, Leaving Home. The alarm went off right on time the next morning, and Parker woke from his dream. He rubbed his eyes, stretched to shake off the last of his sleep, shut the alarm off, and went about his routine. Wash up, slip downstairs. The dining room was bathed in morning light. Sunbeams filtered through the curtains and set the room aglow. A generous breakfast waited on the table, and the smell of coffee and fresh bread made everything feel pleasantly ordinary. "Good morning, Uncle Ben, Aunt May," Peter said, voice still a little hoarse from sleep. "Morning, Peter," Aunt May replied, cradling a steaming mug of milk. Peter sat, tore off a piece of bread, spread some dressing, rolled it up, and ate. He moved naturally. This was their rhythm. Aunt May watched him with motherly concern. "What time did you get back last night?" "I didn't hear the door." Uncle Ben coughed to cover his embarrassment, lowering his eyes as he took a bite of egg. He'd heard Peter come in, but had kept quiet. He'd been dealing with something important. Peter's face went a shade awkward. "Around 11, I think. I didn't want to wake you." "Was it a date?" Aunt May teased. Peter flushed despite himself. He was an adult, but in front of Aunt May he still felt like a kid. He scratched the back of his head. Something like that. "But enough about me. Uncle Ben, was your mission hard? Why didn't you come home until so late?" Ben's expression turned serious. "It was tough. We encountered some strange aliens." He began to summarize the last few days' events. He left out the goriest bits, but it was still an engrossing story. Peter and Aunt May listened as if they were right there with him, proud of the bravery, worried for the danger. After breakfast, Ben drove Peter to the Osborne building. The morning city slid by. Trees swayed, sunlight danced through the leaves, shadows mottled the car windows. Peter watched the city, and his chest tightened with something he hadn't expected to feel so strongly. He swallowed and said, "Uncle Ben, I want to move out. I think it's time I live on my own." Ben's hands tightened on the wheel, and the car drifted slightly. He turned to Peter, surprised. "Why the sudden idea?" Peter took a breath and tried to steady his voice. "I'm grown up, and I want to learn to be independent. I don't want to keep troubling you and Aunt May." Ben thought for a long moment. He'd always known Peter to be thoughtful and responsible, but that made him all the more protective. "We want you to be happy, Peter. We'll support whatever you decide." His voice was warm, threaded with worry. "But living alone isn't easy. Are you sure you're ready?" Peter met his eyes. "I know it'll be hard, but I can handle it. I want to grow." Ben exhaled and nodded. "If you've made up your mind, we'll respect that. Just remember, you'll always have a home here. If you need anything, come back." Gratitude warmed Peter's face. He felt grounded, supported. The car eased to a stop at the Osborne building entrance. Peter leaned over and squeezed Ben's shoulder. "Thanks, Uncle Ben." Ben smiled and patted him. "Go chase your dreams, son. I'll tell your Aunt May." Peter waved and headed toward the building. Ben watched him go until he was out of sight, then drove off. A little ways out, Ben pulled over, slipped into his Spider-Man suit, fired a web at the building's outer wall, and swung up in a practiced arc. He cut a clean, graceful path through the air until he landed on the Osborne roof. A window cleaner up on a scaffold waved. "Hey, good morning, Spider-Man." Ben grinned, raising a hand. "Morning. Be careful up there." He walked to the elevator and pressed the button. The mirror caught his reflection, blue suit gleaming in the light. His thoughts drifted back to the separation from Venom the day before. The memory left him with mixed feelings. When the elevator doors opened, Jessica stepped out, Black Cat in a tight black suit, all poise and danger. "Morning, Spider-Man," she said, eyebrow raised. Ben smiled. "Morning, Black Cat." Jessica's eyes flicked to his suit. "You separated from Venom?" Ben nodded. "Yeah, Dr. Allen helped. We took care of it yesterday." They walked to the office together. Jessica laughed. "I bet Venom yelled at you. That thing has a temper." Ben shook his head with an indulgent half-smile. "I messed up this time. It had every right to be mad." Jessica's tone softened. Kind of sad, really. It's despised where it came from and here, too. Maybe it needs a dog host. It looks like one after all. Ben snorted. "Venom's picky. It chooses who it likes." Jessica gave a mock scoff. "With how it looks, it deserves being single." They entered the office and found Norman behind his desk, rifling through documents with unreadable fatigue on his face. He looked up and smiled. "Early as always, I see." Ben and Jessica sat. Norman glanced between them. "Ben, you don't need to rush back. Take another couple of days off." "No thanks," Ben said. "I haven't moved much in days. I need the exercise." Norman nodded. "Good, Ben. Black Cat, you'll continue patrols. Split up as usual. If anything major comes up, Secretariat will notify you." Jessica looked around. "Where are Bronsky and the others?" Norman set the papers down and explained. "Something happened with General Ross. They've withdrawn. We probably won't be seeing them for a while." Jessica frowned. "The military is really going to let Ross go? That would be embarrassing." Ben's voice was steady. "If we build a case and make Ross a criminal instead of a general, then we can handle him. Exposing military corruption isn't shameful." Norman chuckled. "This is still being decided, but it's our chance. If Ross is distracted, the Patriot Alliance won't be pawns of the military. I want the Alliance independent." "I agree," Jessica said, quick and fierce. "Superheroes shouldn't be government tools." Ben nodded. "We do what we can to save people. Better to stay out of politics." Norman added, "With Bronsky gone, we're short on manpower. We'll need recruits. If you meet anyone suitable, let me know." Ben thought of Venom immediately. If it found a stable host, it might become an asset, but kept silent. Jessica's concern drifted elsewhere. "Anything on research into Venom? Can it help Harry?" Norman smiled tightly. "We're studying it. There's a good chance. Don't worry, Harry will be back on his feet before long." Meanwhile, Banner had been staying at Tony's villa, tucked into a peaceful bay. Floor-to-ceiling windows let sunlight flood a roomy living area. Sea air blew in soft and steady. The setting should have soothed him, but Banner couldn't quiet his mind. He and Tony would share a beer on the terrace sometimes. Tony tried humor and tech stories to loosen the tension, but Banner felt the weight of what was coming. A steady parade of visitors came, each with a different agenda. First came a group of government agents in black suits, stern and accusatory. They blamed him for property damage and injuries and demanded he be held accountable. Anger flashed in Banner's eyes. He knew they were trying to use him. He waved them off, and they tumbled out of the villa, groaning. Next came the reasonable types, paperwork in hand. Lawyers, representatives offering compensation and urging him not to pursue Ross. They spoke calmly, but Banner could see their self-interest. He refused them, too. Then the flatterers arrived. Gifts, antiques, perfumes, even bright smiles and cloying charm. They wanted him on their side. He accepted some gifts and money, but refused every offer to join. He knew they sought power more than friendship. From fugitive hiding in corners to a man constantly courted by people with agendas, Banner had experienced a dizzying swing in fortunes. It left him with a strange, heavy gratitude and a wariness that sat in his gut as he prepared for what came next. Chapter 183, Request. The midday sun poured through the kitchen window, warm light falling across Bruce Banner's face as he worked with concentrated care. A pot of tomato chicken soup sent an inviting aroma through the apartment. Vegetables hissed in the pan, sliced and stirred with practiced ease. It felt less like an ordinary lunch and more like a small, deliberate feast. Just as Bruce was about to sit down, the doorbell rang. He set down his knife and fork, frowned, and wondered who would be visiting at this hour. He opened the door to find Tony Stark grinning in the hallway. Beside him stood a tall, serious man in sunglasses. "Hey, Banner, lunchtime?" Tony said as he walked right in, no ceremony. Bruce sighed. "Tony, what now?" Tony ignored the question and introduced the man at his side. "This is Nick Fury, director of S. Eald." Fury nodded, took off his sunglasses, and fixed Bruce with a sharp look. "Dr. Banner, good to meet you." Bruce frowned. "Director Fury? We've met before." Fury smiled thinly. "We have. We're here to talk, and to sample your cooking if you don't mind." Without asking, the two men entered the kitchen, helped themselves to bowls and chopsticks, and ladled up the last of the tomato chicken soup. Tony lifted a spoon, tasted it, and brightened. "Hey, I didn't know you could cook." Bruce shrugged as he kept slicing a steak he had started preparing. "I had to learn while I was living away from the lab. It's easier than research, mostly timing and seasoning." Tony waved a hand. "Nah, too much trouble. I just order takeout." Fury chuckled. "I only cook if I have time, which I don't." Bruce watched them both, his unease deepening. "You didn't come just to eat. There's something else." Tony held up his hands. "Not me. I'm just the appetizer." He gestured toward Fury. Fury's smile fell. He wiped his mouth, reached into his coat, and pulled out a stack of photographs. The edges were worn, clearly thumbed over many times. He handed them to Bruce with a look that mixed anxiety and expectation. Bruce glanced at the first photo and narrowed his eyes. The image was terrible and impossible. A colossal creature standing amid shattered buildings, dwarfing everything around it. Thick smoke rose from the wreckage. Fires still burned. It was Godzilla, the same monster laying waste to the land of Sakura. At the creature's feet, whole neighborhoods had been reduced to rubble. "The Sakura government couldn't handle it," Fury said quietly. "They called the military. They tried. They lost men, ships, everything. Someone brought the problem to me. They asked if I could talk you into helping." Bruce felt his pulse quicken. He remembered the darker days on campus, how he'd once become a giant, almost as tall as the thing in the photograph. "What is it?" His voice was low, controlled, but the worry showed. "A prehistoric predator? A genetic mutation?" "We don't know," Fury said. "The scientists haven't agreed on its origin. We do know it's deadly to humans. If we don't stop it, it could level whole countries." Bruce stared at the photo again, fingertips brushing the glossy surface as if to confirm the beast was real. Godzilla's eyes in the picture seemed to bore into him, giving an oppressive, personal weight to the destruction. "So you want me to kill it?" Bruce said. The question felt heavier than the words. "Why me? Why should I help?" Fury's gaze hardened. "Because this is the chance you may not get again, to use the power you have to save people. If you help them now, many will see you differently. They'll understand you're a victim, not just a weapon." Bruce's smile faded. He felt the old skepticism rise, memories of exploitation, betrayal, and opportunists who wanted to turn his suffering into someone else's advantage. "I need time to think," he said finally, exhausted. Fury nodded. "I understand, but time is short." Fury left. Tony lingered by the doorway, watching Bruce's indecision. "Don't overthink it," he said with that easy half-smile. "Live for yourself, not for everyone else. If people call you cold for it, so what?" Then Tony left too. Bruce stood alone in his kitchen as night settled, staring out at the lit city. He thought about his old ambitions, the young scientist who'd wanted to change the world, and how harsh realities had stripped away easy answers. This was no simple battle. It was a test of trust and of who he wanted to be. By morning, his resolve had taken shape. Guided by Tony, he walked into Fury's office and met the director's eyes. "All right," Bruce said. "I'll do it. I'll stop the monster." They flew out in a Quinjet to the island nation of Sakura, where the streets, once peaceful, now echoed with terror. Neon lights and traffic were swallowed by screams. "Run! The monster's coming!" people shouted as buildings trembled. A skyscraper was sheared in two. The top half crashed down with a thunderous boom, sending dust and debris into the air. From behind the ruins, a massive head emerged, 50 to 60 meters tall, skin like armor, scales like rock. Each step made the ground shudder. Cars were crushed underfoot like toys. Godzilla moved with single-minded purpose, leaving a trail of devastation in its wake. Aboard the Quinjet, S-Shield agents watched the scene below. Bruce and Tony stood side by side, serious and focused. Bruce had officially agreed to serve as a consultant to S-Shield. He also knew the stakes were higher than he'd imagined. A S-Shield agent relayed details over the headset. "They're calling it Godzilla," she said. "Current estimates put it at 56.8 meters tall and about 2 tons. Her tone was steady, but her eyes betrayed the tension. "It feeds on nuclear radiation. In the last few days, it's destroyed 37 nuclear plants and consumed all the reactor fuel. After feeding, it's grown from about 50.2 meters to 56.8. It's still growing." Tony's brow went up. 6 meters in a few days. If it kept feeding, it could reach 100 meters in no time. "We have to stop it fast," Bruce said. "That's not the worst part," the agent added. Tony flicked a hand. A red, three-dimensional overlay of Godzilla appeared in the air between them. Because it's absorbed so much nuclear energy, it's saturated with radiation, enough energy to be equivalent to 10,000 little boy bombs. If that energy detonated... The cabin went quiet. Every face registered that same bone-deep horror. The thought of that radiation erupting in a single conflagration could vaporize the island, or worse. Tony looked at Bruce. The last question hung in the air like a live wire. "So how do we deal with it?" Chapter 184, Fierce Battle with Godzilla. The city's skyline was swallowed by Godzilla's immense form. He moved like a living mountain, each step a small earthquake that toppled skyscrapers, crushed vehicles, and ripped streets apart. People scattered in every direction, their screams and cries forming a chaotic, terrified symphony. Above the destruction, the Quinjet circled like a vigilant hawk. Inside, Tony Stark stared down at the behemoth below, frowning as his mind raced for a plan. The cabin was taut with tension. Everyone looked to him for orders. "We can't let whatever energy it releases when it dies wipe out the country," Tony said, voice low and steady. "We have to lead it out to sea first. The closest coastline is 50 kilometers from here. Lure it there." Banner frowned. "What do we use as bait? There isn't time to move the radioactive material from the nuclear plant." Tony's mouth curled into a half-smile. "We don't need to move it. We've got a more convenient bait, one that can move on its own." Banner's eyes flashed, surprised, then sharp with realization. "You don't mean..." "Exactly." Tony snapped his fingers. "Contact the nearby fleet commander. I want their nuclear submarine." The female agent hesitated, stunned. "Use a sub as bait. Tony, that's..." Tony's face hardened. "It's worth it. The commander will understand." Then, with a practiced show of charm and cashless persuasion, she began making the calls. Within minutes, the Navy mobilized and a nuclear submarine steamed toward the coast. But Godzilla paid it no mind, continuing on the same course. Tony shook his head, eyes narrowed. "Its target isn't the sub. There's a nuclear plant 30 kilometers ahead. That's closer." It ignored the sub for that. "So we lure it to the sea by other means," he added, turning to Banner. "It's our move now." Godzilla's footfalls crushed the forest at the city's edge. Trees snapped like matchsticks, their branches flung into the air. He plowed through the outskirts as if the earth were paper. In only a few hours, he crossed the city and pushed into dense woodland, the ruins falling away behind him. He seemed intent on the power plant ahead, until a sharp, unfamiliar pain flared across his massive body. His eyes snapped up like a predator's. On his flank, bright pinpricks of fire flared, little stars bursting across his hide, and an angry roar rolled out from his throat. Above him hovered a tiny, golden-red figure, dazzling against the sky. Tony Stark in the Mark 7 armor. "Hey there, big guy," Tony called, half mocking, half provocation. He dangled in the air and grinned. "How you doing?" Godzilla answered with a low bellow and a dangerous glint in his eyes. But after a moment's consideration, a dismissive toss, he blew a twin plume of steam through his nostrils and pivoted to continue his march. Tony bristled. "You looking down on me?" he snapped, and unleashed the full complement of Mark 7's weapons, everything except the Cosmic Cube energy laser. Missiles and repulsors hammered Godzilla's flank. Fire bloomed along the monster's gray-black skin, but when the smoke cleared, the creature walked on unscathed. The missiles had barely left a mark. Tony stared, incredulous. "What the hell is its skin made of? How is it that tough?" Jarvis's calm voice confirmed what he was seeing. Tony felt an unfamiliar prick of helplessness, something he rarely allowed. "Now I see why a country like Sakura can't stop this," Tony muttered, then turned to Banner with a more urgent tone. "Your turn." "No problem." Banner opened the Quinjet's hatch and jumped. Wind screamed past him as he dropped, then a wash of green light erupted around him. The light overtook the sky and darkened Godzilla's scales into a greenish hue, then coalesced into a towering 60-meter-tall Hulk, taller than Godzilla himself. Inside the green hulking form, Banner's private rage flashed. Memories of Betty with another man washed through him, fueling a molten anger. The Hulk's footsteps shook the earth, trees splintered, and the ground cracked under his weight. Godzilla paused, wariness in his gaze. The two giants faced off in the center of the wrecked forest. Steam hissed from Godzilla's nostrils like a warning. The Hulk's eyes burned with rage, muscles bulging, fists clenched. Tony hovered nearby, tense. "Banner, hold it together. Don't kill it. This is bait." The Hulk answered with a furious roar and charged. His fists slammed into Godzilla's flank with the force of a falling mountain. Godzilla met him, whipping out claws that could shred steel. Their collision sent a shockwave tearing through the forest. Trees snapped like toothpicks, and the ground split beneath them. They locked in a raw test of strength, each blow rocking the other. Godzilla's eyes turned feral. Dorsal plates along his back began to glow an eerie blue. The light raced forward along his spine to his throat. Tony's warning came too late. The monster inhaled and unleashed a blinding beam of nuclear blue energy. It struck the Hulk full in the head with a hellish roar. The blast melted the Hulk's head away like wax under a torch. Light seared the sky and then vanished. Godzilla stood, roaring triumphantly. Banner, however, was not dead. He'd been protected somewhere deep inside the Hulk's form and felt the blast's horrible heat, terrified at how close it had come to obliterating him. If that atomic breath had hit his chest, he likely would have been vaporized. Breathing hard, Banner calmed himself and went back to the plan. He wrenched free from the ruined remains of his own cranium, pushed his massive headless body free, landed a crushing blow on Godzilla, then turned and ran toward the sea. Godzilla snarled in confused fury at the headless green giant's escape and gave chase. He would not let his prey slip away. The two titans thundered out of the city, across shattered landscape, and finally reached the coastline, heading for open water. End of chapter. Chapter 185, Seduction. The ground trembled. Through the haze on the horizon, two colossal shapes loomed, Godzilla and the Headless Hulk. Godzilla's bulk was like a moving mountain. Each step seemed capable of shattering the earth. The Hulk looked grotesque without a head, but he still radiated terrible strength. Bruce Banner stood hidden at the tree line, staring at the blue expanse of ocean. He inhaled slowly and made a decision. The enormous Hulk figure that had towered over the island shrank rapidly as the anger that powered him retreated like a tide back into Banner's body. Strange, membranous wings unfurled from his back, and he slipped lightly into the woods and vanished. Godzilla thundered after him, each of its massive footsteps a rolling drumbeat. The predator reached the place where Banner had been, then stopped, confused. The creature's intelligent eyes scanned the shoreline. It could not find the enemy it had been tracking. Frustrated, Godzilla stomped the ground several times, sending up dirt and rocks as if to vent its irritation. Then Godzilla's nostrils quivered. A new scent had reached it, a scent of the sea and, more importantly, of radiation. The creature turned toward the water. For a moment its memory seemed to stir. Once it had belonged to the ocean, a smaller, simpler life. The cool sea met its skin, comfort washed over it. It slid into the water, its dorsal plates cutting like knives through the surface before disappearing. Beneath the waves, Godzilla accelerated, moving with astonishing speed and intent toward a single target, a nuclear submarine. "Okay, Godzilla's heading for the sub. We did it," one of the SHIELD agents on the Quinjet called out, excitement bubbling in her voice. Tony Stark didn't share her elation. In his suit's HUD, he watched a red blip race across the sonar feed toward the sub and spoke flatly into the comms. "Don't celebrate yet. This is only the first step. The real question is whether we can kill it." He remembered the last fight. Godzilla's hide was nearly impervious to conventional ordnance. If they were going to actually hurt it, they needed heavy, specialized weapons, ground-penetrating warheads, something along those lines. They didn't have time to prepare those. All they had was the risky plan Tony had brought: lure Godzilla to the submarine and use its warhead as bait, then try to finish the job with the Cosmic Cube Energy laser cannon. Below, Godzilla's eyes glittered. It pushed through the water like a hunting dog on a scent, the faint, poisonous tang of concentrated nuclear radiation sharpening its focus. The submarine, Los Angeles, the Navy boat Tony had requisitioned, was moving fast, hull trembling as alarms began to wail. "Los Angeles, be advised, it's moving inside the sea at nearly 100 kilometers per hour. Speed up and don't let it catch you. This is a matter of life and death for everyone aboard," Tony warned. The Los Angeles was carrying a bomb of obscene yield, a warhead with the equivalent of nearly 2 billion tons of TNT, enough to drive Godzilla into a frenzy. The commander didn't hesitate. "Full speed ahead. Get us out of its path." On the sub's sonar, a huge red blip closed in. The crew punched the throttles and steered for a planned rendezvous point, a remote, uninhabited island where the blast, if it came to that, would do the least harm to populated areas, certainly nothing that would reach distant Sakura country. The naval fleet followed the same course, ready to converge on the island. Banner, who had hidden after the earlier clash, climbed back into the Quinjet at Tony's signal. The SHIELD agents glanced at him with a mix of awe and apprehension. Even in human form, he carried the shadow of what he'd been. He sat quietly and closed his eyes, replaying the battle in his head, every strain, every surge of power. The fight had been short, but it had exhausted him like no other. Underwater Godzilla didn't slow. Its bulk churned the sea into a tumult, a living battleship homing in on the submarine. Inside the Los Angeles, the sonar alarms never stopped sounding. The commander's face was tight with strain as the island's contours finally resolved on the instruments. "There it is. Full speed. Take us around to the far side of the island," he ordered. Above the island, the Quinjet hovered while Tony hovered nearby in his armor. He monitored Godzilla's approach and keyed the comms. "Banner, rest up. You're up again." Banner opened his eyes. Anger flamed in them. "I'm ready. This time, I won't lose." Tony's face, visible through the helmet HUD, held grim confidence. He knew that only the Hulk's raw, brute might could stand against Godzilla in a physical confrontation. The Los Angeles slipped into position and waited. When Godzilla breached near the island, the Hulk sprang. Banner's anger flooded back in an instant. Green light swelled, and he ballooned into the 60-meter-tall Hulk, crashing down onto the island's shore. The impact shook the ground. Trees toppled and boulders cracked. Hulk's roar split the air, challenging Godzilla. Godzilla paused and chose to fight. It charged, striking the seabed and surging forward with terrifying speed. Waves crashed around the tiny island as the two gargantuan combatants collided. Hulk's arms snaked into the surf and clamped on Godzilla's scales. With a heave, he hauled the creature out of the water and slammed it onto land. Godzilla thrashed, tail whipping up gale-force winds and seawater. The ground crumbled under the force. Hulk met the attack head-on, battering Godzilla back and trying to buy time, to sap the monster's strength until the fleet could arrive. If the battle had taken place in a city, it would have meant total devastation. On the Quinjet, agents watched, pale and silent. In Washington, military brass watched the live feed in stunned silence. The quiet in the conference room was thick. The only sound came from the fight on the screen. A junior officer let out a nervous, incredulous laugh. No one joined him. The room's senior advisor, an older white-haired man, cleared his throat, and spoke with cold authority. Bruce Banner's situation needs to be handled. He must be a weapon in our hands, not our enemy. Another officer hesitated. So General Ross, he began, and was cut off. The old man's expression turned hard. Look at what's happening. If he's not clean, we have to act ruthlessly. The room murmured agreement. Hands were raised. Decisions were being made even as the island shook beneath the combatants' steps. Back on the island, Banner watched Godzilla's dorsal plates like a hawk. Every time they lit up, it meant atomic fire was coming. He dodged the classic beam attack and breathed a little easier, but Godzilla had another trick. A bluish haze built in Godzilla's jaws. Instead of a focused beam, a wide, with smoky plume of blue flame poured out, arcing and spreading like a chemical fog. The attack swept across Hulk's flank and engulfed half his body. The heat was unimaginable. Rage, the power that sustained Hulk, ebbed rapidly as if sucked from Banner's soul. Panic prickled at Banner's skin. He didn't wait to see the end. With a convulsive wrench, he forced his consciousness out of the Hulk's heart, breaking through the skin. Wings erupted from his back and he burst free, rocketing into the sky and hiding high above the island. From that vantage, he watched in helpless horror as the anger that had shaped Hulk burned away under Godzilla's atomic breath until it was ash. Banner sucked in a long, shaky breath and whispered, incredulous and terrified, "This monster is too powerful, isn't it?" Chapter 186, Focused Fire. Godzilla seemed unusually triumphant after once again besting that formidable foe. Its colossal body shimmered with a metallic luster under the sun. It tossed its head back and let out a thunderous roar that rattled the ground. The agents in the Quinjet went pale at the sound. From the distant horizon came a low, rolling roar of their own. The American fleet had arrived. 7 destroyers and a sea-dominant aircraft carrier slid into view like a steel leviathan. The ship's wakes carved white paths across the water, as if drawing a curtain for the battle to come. Dozens of fighters launched from the carrier, streaking over Godzilla's head, their afterburners painting bright lines in the sky like drawn blades aimed straight at the beast. Beneath the surface, 4 submarines lay in wait. The contingent was only a fraction of the U.S. Third Fleet, but it was enough to make any coastal force think twice. It was a rolling iron fist poised to break through Godzilla's defenses. Tony hovered above, armor glinting, eyes burning with excitement at the confrontation to come. He inhaled and spoke into the comms. "Start now. Don't hold back. Full firepower." "Roger that," came the fleet commander's voice, taut with a mix of nerves and adrenaline. He relayed the order to every ship. "This is not a drill. Target the monster on the island. Engage at will." "Copy," came the unified reply. Guns and missile launchers obliged. Missiles and shells arced toward Godzilla, a metallic rain. Fighter-launched missiles left white streaks as they dove. Submarines surfaced and shot ballistic missiles skyward, slamming through water and aiming for the creature. Godzilla answered with a roar so fierce the air seemed to split. Its tail lashed out like a steel whip, snapping apart several incoming missiles in a spray of flame and shrapnel. Explosions bloomed around it. Wreckage rained like burning petals, but Godzilla stood, scales flashing under the firelight like an ancient, impenetrable armor. Shockwaves still hammered its massive frame, and it issued a roar of pain that only fed its fury. Each movement was a warning from primordial power. Challenge this, and you will be destroyed. Human determination refused to relent. More ordnance fell. The battlefield became a furnace. Flames and concussive blasts threw dust and debris into the sky. Godzilla's enormous body shuddered under the bombardment, but did not collapse. Then its dorsal plates ignited with an intense blue glow, like lightning arcing across its spine. The light grew, and the air seemed to charge. Tony watched, heart pounding. "Now," he whispered. He activated his secret weapon, the cosmic cube energy laser cannon he'd been refining. His palms came together, forearms locking, as the suit shifted and telescoped, forming a thick barrel across his arms. A searing blue energy coalesced at the muzzle, alive and hungry. Below, Godzilla fired first. A torrent of atomic breath lashed outward, shredding missiles and punching into the carrier in the distance. The carrier literally tore apart, an instant cathedral of explosions and fire. Tony didn't hesitate. He raised the cannon and shouted, "Cosmic Cube Energy Laser, fire!" A blade of blue lightning tore from his suit, arcing toward Godzilla with a pressure that bent the air around it. The beam was so swift the human eye could barely follow it. Godzilla twisted to avoid it, but not quickly enough. Tony's beam struck the beast's shoulder, carving through scales harder than stone. A sharp, cracking sound split the chaos. Blood bled and was immediately seared to charcoal by the beam's heat. The smell of burned flesh filled the air. Godzilla let out a scream that seemed to convulse the planet. Its eyes flashed with pain and rage. Blue light surged within its mouth, condensing into a second, concentrated blast. Godzilla met Tony's beam midair. The two energies collided and exploded into a searing fireball that swallowed sound itself. For a breathless moment, everything froze. Light, noise, even motion. When the glare subsided, a devastating shockwave slammed outward. Rocks and the exhausted ruins of the island collapsed beneath the force. A cloud of dust and debris shot up, obscuring sun and sky. Godzilla could no longer stand. For the first time it toppled, massive bulk hitting the ground with a thunderous impact that shuddered across the shoreline. It thrashed, struggling to rise, but the force pinned it down. Its limbs sprawled uselessly, and it groaned. Tony felt the shock through his suit. The impact ripped systems apart. Alarms screamed inside his helmet as indicators flashed crimson. The armor tumbled out of the sky, parts flinging away like a meteor shower. He fought to stay conscious. The suit was failing, and a fall would mean death. Below, someone reached up. Banner, sweating, composed, grabbed the crippled armor and held on. Green wings, 2 pairs, beat rapidly behind him as he fought to steady the fall. Tony's vision swam, but he recognized the face. Banner tightened his grip and hauled Tony back toward the Quinjet. He slotted Tony into a seat, panting, calm despite the chaos. "You okay?" Banner asked softly as he steadied himself. Tony peeled off his mask, forcing a grin. "Thanks to you. Otherwise I'd be space junk." Banner shrugged, exhaling. "Consider it a reward for the drinks you owe me." Tony laughed weakly, dizzy but amused. "Gee, my life is worth a few cocktails. That's reassuring." Before Tony could banter further, a shout sliced through the din. "He's not dead yet." Tony snapped upright, but Banner pushed him back into the seat. "Sit. I've got this," Banner said and stepped forward. Then, oddly, he turned back to Tony with a wry look. "Try to irritate me with your trash talk." "What?" Tony blinked. He had never been asked that as a favor. Grinning, he went for it. "You know, Banner, your green hat really suits you. Very flattering." Green light flared in Banner's eyes. He drew a fist wrapped in emerald energy and punched the Quinjet's hatch with a single blow, sending it flying. "Thank you, Tony," he said flatly. Tony shrugged. "You're welcome." On the island, Godzilla fought to its feet, eyes burning with stubborn fury. It lashed its tail, whipping up a gale as it rose. Then, as if answering some unseen call, something huge descended from the sky. A green blade, dozens of meters long, fell straight down with terrible momentum. It slammed into the ruins like a plunging mountain. Boom! Chapter 187, Death Battle Banner's anger, stoked by Tony's voice in his ear, finally erupted like a volcano. His eyes flashed with fury, and raw power flooded back in. In a single motion, he leapt from hundreds of meters up. The wind whistled past him, and the Hulk formed in midair, a 50-meter-tall green colossus, gripping a sword dozens of meters long. The blade caught the sun and shimmered green, as if it could cut through anything in its path. "Godzilla!" Banner roared, the name booming from the Hulk's throat. He had one goal, to finish the monster before him. Godzilla lay amid the ruins of the deserted island, a battlefield-scarred, hulking mass, wounded but still dangerous. The Hulk slammed down on him with all the pent-up rage of the moment, swinging the enormous sword in a green arc that promised devastation. The blade bit into Godzilla's back with a thunderous crack. The impact shook the battered island, tearing the ground open. Seawater surged through the faults and soaked Godzilla's flank. The beast bellowed, a sound of pain and fury. With a sudden sweep of his thick tail, Godzilla struck back. The wind screamed, and the Hulk was hurled aside, crashing down and sending a plume of dust into the air. Godzilla fought to straighten himself, eyes blazing, and then turned for the ocean. The sea was his sanctuary. If he made it into the water, he could recover in geothermal radiation. If he escaped, they would regret it. "Don't let it get to the sea!" Tony's voice crackled urgently through Banner's headset. He knew as well as anyone that once Godzilla dove in, killing him would be nearly impossible. Banner hauled the Hulk to his feet, sneering, determination hard in his eyes. You wish to run? Not on my watch. He closed the distance in strides, coming up behind Godzilla. Raising the massive sword with both hands, he concentrated everything into a single downward blow. Godzilla, however, was no simple target. Feeling the wind, he spun and opened his maw. A column of blazing blue energy surged from his throat and struck the sword directly. The blast shoved the Hulk back. His footing faltered. Godzilla took 2 heavy steps and slammed his feet into the ground, shaking the island and pressing onward toward the surf. Jets above screamed in, dozens of missiles streaking through the air to strike the beast. Explosions burst like pyrotechnics along Godzilla's flanks, and the thrust of them forced him to halt, his massive frame trembling but resolving. The remaining destroyers and submarines, repairing from earlier blows, joined in. Artillery from the sea pounded, and torpedoes rose from the depths. Human firepower hammered at the creature, leaving fresh wounds and stoking a dangerous, burning rage. Godzilla's dorsal plates flared electric blue. Radiation flooded his body as he let loose all the power he had accumulated. Even his scarlet eyes glowed blue as his chest swelled with energy. Then he opened his mouth wide and unleashed a beam as thick as a building, 20 meters of concentrated atomic fire. Sky and sea turned briefly to a blinding blue as the beam lanced out and cut through destroyers, subs, and jets alike, turning ships into fireballs and aircraft into falling embers. A shield Quinjet barely avoided being shredded, pilots fighting the controls, but several planes were hit and crashed in flames. The Hulk absorbed most of the onslaught. The atomic breath forced him backward, his greenness dimming until he looked almost translucent. It bought Godzilla time to expend the rest of his energy. The beast panted, chest heaving, the ferocity still in his eyes, but exhaustion seeping in. Each step toward the water became labored, but he kept going. If he reached the depths, he could heal. Banner watched Godzilla's back recede and ground his teeth. Everyone's sacrifices, everything, couldn't be allowed to be for nothing. Rage and despair mixed in him. The remnant of the Hulk flickered, then exploded outward into a shower of jagged green boulders hurled under Banner's control. The rocks arced and smashed into Godzilla's flanks with bone-cracking thunder. Godzilla roared, but he staggered on. Sweat streaked Banner's face as he pushed on, summoning one attack after another. Rocks rained down, cracking Godzilla's scales. Blood oozed from the fissures and dripped into the sea, staining the water red. Each step became harder. The beast's breath came in rasping gasps. Banner was panting too. This had been too long, too exhausting, but he forced himself to gather every last scrap of strength. He condensed a single enormous green boulder and held it suspended above the wounded Titan's head. "Go to hell," he rasped, voice hoarse and raw, the words sounding like the last thing he could muster. He hurled the mass down. Time seemed to blur. The meteor of green rock slammed into Godzilla with a cataclysmic crash. The island trembled as the creature's body crumpled under the blow and toppled into the shallow surf with a thunderous impact. Only half of Godzilla's length sank beneath the waves. His tail thrashed weakly, sending up a small spray. From the Quinjet, Tony watched the monitors and allowed himself a cautious exhale. "Have we won?" one of the agents in the jet asked, hope and uncertainty warring in her voice. Tony shrugged, a small, weary lift at the corner of his mouth, but his eyes stayed cold and wary. "Maybe, but let's not pop the champagne yet." Then something nobody expected happened. The USS Los Angeles, a nuclear-powered submarine that had been lurking behind the island, surfaced from its hiding spot after witnessing the grievous losses of its comrades. Inside the sub, the commander stared at the image of Godzilla on the screen and made a decision. This was a singular chance to end the threat once and for all. "Fire all missiles," he ordered, his voice steady and resolved. A moment later, Jarvis spoke quietly into Tony's ear. "Sir, you should be aware, 2 seconds ago the Los Angeles-class submarine launched an attack on Godzilla." "What?" Tony's face went white. He swung his gaze to the displays and saw, unfurling from the beast, a mushroom cloud, massive, roaring, obliterating. The explosion was so loud it seemed to split the sky. "Damn it, what do they think they're doing?" Tony hissed, rage and helplessness colliding in him. Banner, sprawled on the scarred ground, saw the light of the explosion bloom in the distance. His body had reached the absolute limit, Every muscle trembled, and his vision blurred. The concussion forced his eyes open, but the scene before him made his chest clench with a complicated, bitter storm of emotions. A faint, green glow wrapped his exhausted form. His eyelids grew heavy. With one last ragged breath, Banner slipped into the dark. Chapter 188, Departure. Inside the Quinjet, Tony stared at the screen, jaw tight. The mushroom cloud was fading, leaving a ruined coastline. Mountains turned to rubble, not a single tree standing straight. The air on the feed looked thick with smoke and the metallic tang of explosives, as if the world itself had gone silent. Tony's fingers tapped the console unconsciously. Anxiety rolled through him like a tide. Was Godzilla really dead? Or was this only a pause before the real horror returned? "Tony, we have to get out of here. The radiation levels are off the charts," the woman beside him said, her voice tense. Fear flickered in her eyes. Her words felt sharp in the undercurrent of the dying world on the screen. Tony shook his head. His voice was steady. "No. Banner is still down there. I'm going to get him." "But your suit, it's damaged. How are you going to save him?" she asked, bewildered. Tony gave her a sideways grin. "Who said I only have one suit?" There was a calm, almost mischievous certainty in his tone. He tapped the console once. "Jarvis, ETA?" 1 minute and 30 seconds, Jarvis replied, his voice cool and unflappable. Tony let out a breath of relief. "Good, we should make it." He looked up at the pilot. "Fly higher." He stood and moved toward the cabin door, ignoring the agent's surprised expression. Then the ruins answered with a low, earth-rattling roar, like something waking up beneath the world. Tony's eyes widened. He adjusted the camera feed and watched a vast black shape resolve out of the smoke. Godzilla. The creature was massive, like a rising mountain, and where it had been broken and burned before, more than half the wounds had knit shut. Its dorsal plates were glowing blue again, pulsing with a cold, lethal light. In a landscape of ash, that cobalt glow sliced clean and terrible through the fog. "I knew it," Tony muttered. His breath came out hard. He'd always suspected Godzilla fed on radiation. A nuclear strike wouldn't kill it, it would only refuel it. Watching the creature heal, his anger and helplessness met. So much sacrifice, so many lives lost, all for nothing. Godzilla dove, and the feed followed its black bulk into the sea, heading straight for a naval submarine. Tony realized in an instant what that meant. The sub and everyone aboard were in immediate danger. There was nothing he could do to change the outcome. All he could do was hope that drawing Godzilla away would spare the nearby cities. "Banner, you have to be okay," Tony whispered, feeling the wind on his face. He leaned forward and let himself fall out of the aircraft. Firelight flared behind him as spare Iron Man components launched themselves from the Quinjet. Pieces flew in a practiced, almost eager arc, closing around him in midair. The plating clicked and locked into place with the precision of a well-oiled machine. The mask slid down and sealed. A completed suit traced an arc into the sky and pointed toward where the Hulk had disappeared. The world blurred past. Ruins, seawater, smoke, everything chaotic and wrong. "Hold on, Banner, I'm coming," Tony said under his breath as the suit screamed toward the ocean. Later, the broadcast would say that the terrifying monster had been lured away from the city's edge by the suddenly appearing Hulk and driven into the sea. The shadow of disaster over Sakura country seemed to lift. The Prime Minister offered gratitude and invited Stark Industries to help rebuild. Meanwhile, in an old gym somewhere else, Steve Rogers was sweating through a training session. The old radio on a bench murmured the same reports, a flat, distant voice against the squeak of weights. He worked through the routine, muscles catching the light, when Nick Fury opened the door. The bell above it chimed, breaking the hush. "Didn't expect you here," Steve said, setting down dumbbells and turning the radio off. The gym fell quiet aside from their breathing. "I came for you, Captain," Fury said. His voice carried a rare solemnity. Steve felt a knot form in his stomach. Fury sank into a chair and folded his hands. "Tony and Banner tried. They failed. They couldn't kill the thing. And we don't know how to stop it, how it was made, or even how it keeps coming back." Steve's chest tightened. He'd believed in Tony and Banner. He still did. "Banner's strong. Tony's a genius. How did it fail?" "We all underestimated it," Fury said bluntly. "If it keeps consuming nuclear energy, it could eventually destroy the world." Steve swallowed. "So that's why you're here." Fury nodded. We found references to those 12 zodiac talismans you mentioned, stuff tied to the spell you once spoke of, but nothing points to a definitive source, except you, or rather, the Lord that was merged with you. At Fury's words, an inner voice, impatient and familiar, tugged at Steve's mind. Your vacation's over, it said. Get moving, Rogers. Steve ignored the voice and asked, You found them that fast? Fury let out a dry smile. Maybe they're all fakes, maybe they're junk, but we can't wait to find out. Steve felt the weight of responsibility settle on him. He had the Lord inside him, an immense, dangerous power. He'd avoided using it, worried about what it might do to the people he loved. Now the world needed whatever advantage he could bring. When do we leave? Steve asked. Anytime, Fury said, and I'm assigning you an assistant, Agent Sharon Carter. At the name, Steve saw her bright smile in his mind. Sharon's warmth came like sunlight. But close behind it was another face, Peggy Carter. He'd not seen Peggy since he merged with the Lord. That absence was a wound he wore constantly. He'd chosen safety, refusing to risk the Lord's influence on her, but the choice had cost him dearly. The Lord's voice threaded through his thoughts, taunting. Why think so much? If anyone objects, beat them down. Do whatever you want. Steve closed his eyes. Holy Lord, he said aloud to no one, life in the human world isn't that simple. The Lord's reply was smug. If it were me, none of this would be a problem. I could make Carter fall into your arms. I can restore her youth, make her 18 again, and she'd never age. Steve stilled. You can do that? You've got to find my lost power first, the Lord said. Find the zodiac talismans. Temptation gnawed at Steve. The idea of seeing Peggy young again, of erasing the decades between them, was almost unbearable. Still, he knew the root problem wasn't his appearance. Peggy cared about values, courage, partnership, not a trick to make her young. He remembered her voice, gentle, steadfast. Time changes everything, but true love endures. Steve didn't want to force anything on her. Okay, he said finally, firm. I'll find the talismans. Not for me, for Peggy. The Lord's laughter inside his head was satisfied. Good, you'll see there is nothing truly impossible. Steve's resolve hardened. He packed quickly, a man with a mission and a promise. He didn't know what he would find or what he'd have to sacrifice, but he wasn't going to regret trying. The city glittered below as he left. On the other side of his new journey, a familiar smile waited. Chapter 189. Moving, Daily 1001th Day. Parker stood in the center of his bedroom, his eyes roaming over the familiar scene as if saying a final goodbye to the small world he'd lived in for years. Everything here carried memories. The desk in the corner plastered with superhero posters, the framed photo of him with Uncle Ben and Aunt May on the nightstand, the withered cactus on the windowsill that he'd once tended carefully. He took a long breath, trying to draw these memories into himself and hold them there. He opened the closet and stared at the clothes hanging neatly on their hangers. Slowly, as if each garment represented a moment he couldn't quite let go of, he took them down, folded them carefully, and packed them into a suitcase. His hand lingered on a red and blue hoodie, his favorite from high school, the one that had accompanied him through so many years. He ran his fingers over the fabric, reluctance flashing in his eyes, then tucked it into the bottom of the suitcase. He moved to the bookshelf and pulled down a few favorite titles, from science fiction to physics texts, dusting them off before tucking them into his backpack. These books were more than knowledge. They were company when loneliness crept in. He knew they'd continue to sustain him. The room fell quiet. Standing in the middle of the now empty space, Parker felt a flood of emotion he couldn't name. He sighed, slung his backpack on, grabbed the suitcase, and stepped out of the bedroom. Each step felt fragile, like walking across thin ice made of memories. He was afraid to slip and be swallowed by the past. Uncle Ben waited outside the door. When Parker appeared, a warm smile came to the older man's face. Have you got everything? Take what you need first. You can bring the rest later. I don't have much, Parker said, holding up his luggage with a small, bittersweet smile. He understood that leaving meant a new beginning and a farewell. All right, let's go downstairs. Uncle Ben patted his shoulder, took the suitcase, and led the way. Aunt May rose from the sofa when she heard them. She wrapped Parker in a long, tight hug, warm and steady, full of the care she'd always given him. Peter, remember to take care of yourself. Don't stay up too late. Eat your meals. Don't rush, and change your clothes more often. She fussed over his collar, every word threaded with worry and affection. Her fingers smoothed his shirt as if trying to pass along all the love she had stored up. Parker was moved. He smiled, eyes wet. He tried to steady his voice. I will, Aunt May. I'll take care of myself. You both take care too. You must come back to visit. There's always a room here for you, Aunt May added, forcing a smile so he wouldn't see her tears. Parker looked at her long and hard, then nodded. He turned toward the door, promising himself that this was only a pause. One day he'd return, grown and accomplished. Uncle Ben and Aunt May walked him to the car. She stood in the doorway, watching until the car pulled away, tears in her eyes. They loaded the trunk, climbed in, and waved goodbye. Parker kept watching until she disappeared from view, then closed his eyes. The ache and reluctance were real, but so too was the drive toward his dream. Your grandmother looked at me like that when I left for college in Philadelphia, Uncle Ben said quietly, breaking the car's silence with a trace of nostalgia. Parker opened his eyes and felt a warm surge of gratitude. He knew how deep Uncle Ben and Aunt May's love for him ran, like the expectations that had propelled Uncle Ben himself years ago. I felt the same mix of hope and worry, Uncle Ben continued, smiling into the memory. But no matter where you go, family is your strongest support. Peter, come back and visit. I will, Parker promised. They drove slowly into the city. Buildings rose higher, traffic thickened. They weren't going to the apartment yet, they were just passing through. Then a loud explosion detonated not far away. The gentle expression on Uncle Ben's face hardened. He pulled the car to the curb. Peter, stay here, he said, voice steady. Don't go wandering off. I'll be right back. Parker knew what his uncle meant and nodded. Be careful, Uncle Ben. You too, Uncle Ben answered with a brief smile, and then he ran into an alley without looking back. Parker hesitated, almost wanting to follow, but he stopped himself. He wasn't a trained fighter. His strength might be a little above average, but he couldn't take on armed criminals. Better to stay in the car and not distract Uncle Ben. He sighed, frustrated at his own limitations. How long before he could actually help? Uncle Ben dashed down the alley. No one else was around, only a few stray cats rifling through a dumpster. He stripped off his coat to reveal a blue costume clinging to his skin. The fabric gleamed faintly in the dim light. He drew a deep breath, centered himself, then launched upward, shooting a web like an arrow and swinging toward the source of the explosion. Less than a minute later, he arrived at a large bank. The front doors were half off their hinges, and gunshots and screams echoed from inside. He cursed under his breath. Another bank robbery? Fourth one this week? Can't they manage on their own? He dove through the ruined doorway. Instantly, his spider sense flared, stinging like electricity. He twisted, narrowly avoiding a whiplashing mechanical tentacle that scraped the corner of his coat. The tentacle glittered metallically and moved with terrifying speed. Ben shot webbing at the ceiling and flung himself out of harm's way, slamming onto the overhead beams. He stuck to the ceiling, peering down at the chaos below. The sight tightened his chest. A short, dumpy man in a gray lab coat stood surrounded by 4 writhing mechanical tentacles. The man looked disheveled, his hair uncombed, his sunglasses hiding his eyes. At his feet were stacks of money bags, gleaming invitingly. Dr. Octopus, Uncle Ben muttered, recognition and dread at once. Once a brilliant scientist, the man had been twisted by a failed experiment. Now the tentacles seemed to control him. Ben remembered the project. It had been funded by Oscorp. He'd heard Norman's regret about that failure more than once. Spider-Man! Dr. Octopus barked, his voice dropping into a harsh edge. The tentacles danced more violently. Don't interrupt me. I just want what's mine. You're committing a crime. Put the money down, Ben replied, firing several lines of web to bind the tentacles. They were cut through as if by knives. The tentacles moved like living things, slicing his webbing without effort. Try to stop me and I'll kill you, Dr. Octopus snarled, and the mechanical limbs lunged in unison. Ben dodged on the ceiling with practiced ease, the wind from the tentacles whipping at his face and tearing the air. Then he saw a cluster of terrified employees and customers trapped in a corner, trembling with fear. He had to end this quickly. I can't let this go on, he thought, and scanned for the tentacle's weakness. They were flexible, but every joint and hinge had limits. If he could find that flaw, he could take Octavius down with one decisive move. Chapter 190, Dr. Octopus. The bank lobby felt as if time itself had stopped. Anxiety hung in every corner. Passers-by cowered against walls, eyes wide with helplessness. In the center of it all, Uncle Ben and Dr. Octopus were locked in a brutal, frantic struggle, each hunting for the opening that would end the fight. Outside, a siren keened, slicing through the tense silence. Dr. Octopus's brow furrowed. His 4 metal tentacles twitched and slithered, restless. Their polished tips clicked against marble as if seeking purchase. Then his gaze landed on the sacks of gold coins stacked near the teller stations. A cold, ruthless look crossed his face. Without warning, he snatched up a bag and hurled it at Uncle Ben. Ben reacted instantly, fast, nimble, built for this. He rolled aside several times, letting the heavy bag whistle past and smash to the floor. The coins scattered with a dull, ringing clatter. Dr. Octopus blinked in surprise. He had underestimated his opponent. His expression hardened, his eyes went colder. With a sneer, he scanned the hiding crowds, and in a cruel display, lashed out with his tentacles, snatching several terrified bystanders and flinging them toward Ben. "No, stop!" Ben's chest tightened. He saw the innocent people helpless against those armored limbs. He fired webs with pinpoint accuracy, snaring the thrown civilians and hauling them safely back to the ground. But that brief hesitation was all Dr. Octopus needed. Pride glittered in the scientist's eyes as his appendages shot out again and clamped around Ben's body. The metal arms were relentless, like steel constricting flesh. Ben struggled, but the grip tightened, pinning him. Dr. Octopus laughed, spinning his quarry and smashing him against a wall. The impact tore masonry loose, bricks and dust exploded into the air, and Ben was flung out through the bank's front, skidding across the street until he came to a stop. Pain knifed through his ribs. He coughed, lungs burning. From the dust, Dr. Octopus emerged, tentacles flashing like the limbs of some metallic beast, a monstrous silhouette that sent the crowd further back in terror. He snorted and plucked one horrified woman from the retreating cluster, holding her in a grip of metal. She clawed and screamed, but there was no strength in her struggles. Using his mechanical arms, Dr. Octopus began to scale the building's facade with inhuman speed. Ben pushed himself up, clutching his bruised chest. Determination flared in his eyes. If Octavius escaped, more people would be hurt. Gritting his teeth, he forced himself to his feet and shot a webline after the fleeing villain. High on the building, Dr. Octopus surveyed the city as if it were already his. He did not notice the figure slipping along the wall behind him. Uncle Ben in the blue spider suit, moving like a hunting spider, silent, swift, single-minded. Ben's spider sense hummed with purpose. The captive woman was all that mattered. He struck from behind. A web whiplashed around the mechanical arms, locking them to the building's surface like a steel cable. Dr. Octopus thrashed, hissing in fury, but Ben's webs held firm. "Damn Spider-Man," Otto spat. "I haven't done anything to deserve this. I need to continue my experiments." "You're committing crimes, Dr. Otto. Put her down now," Ben said, voice steady, eyes on the girl. He couldn't risk a single wrong move that would put her life in danger. Ben tried to reach the man's remorse, to break through with words. "Dr. Otto, Norman Osborn respects your talent. If you'll listen, I can help. I'll talk to him about getting support for your research." Norman's name was like an acid to Octavius. His face twisted. "Norman Osborn? That traitor? He'd never back me." The scientist's temper snapped. "Since you're so eager to save her, then take her." One of the tentacles swung wildly and threw the girl from a high ledge. She screamed as she tumbled through the air, dozens of meters falling. Ben's heart dropped. No time to hesitate, he leapt without thinking. He fired a web that caught on the side of the building like an anchor, using it to fling himself out into a graceful arc. The wind roared in his ears as he closed the distance. The girl's cries were a fragile thread in the night. At the last instant, Ben shot another strand, wrapping it around her waist. He yanked hard and pulled them together, catching her in a brace of arms. Her body shuddered against his as he locked his grip. He fired one more web to the building and used it to slow his descent, landing them both safely on the pavement. Panting, the girl collapsed to her knees, tears spilling down her face. She stared up at Spider-Man, trembling with relief and gratitude. "Thank you, Spider-Man," she stammered. "You're safe now?" Ben said, thumbed and steady despite the pain. But his eyes tracked the edge of the rooftop, where Dr. Octopus had already slipped away into the maze of steel and glass. The battle wasn't over. A sudden, thunderous roar drew every gaze. A skyscraper not far away erupted in flame. Orange tongues licked out from its upper floors, smoke pouring into the night. People screamed as the scene shifted from rescue to mayhem. Dr. Octopus had vanished in the confusion. Ben gave the woman a quick nod and shot out into the city, swinging toward the burning tower. The heat stung even from a distance. Half the sky glowed red. From within shattered windows came the faint, desperate sounds of people trapped inside. He moved like a practiced rescuer, webbing up to windows and into devastated floors. Heat waves lapped at him, sweat soaked his mask. At one scorched window, he found a mother clutching her small child, surrounded by smoke and fire. Ben shot a tether, hauled them out, shielding them with his body as they dropped to safety. The mother sobbed, clutching her child and thanking him through tears. "Go, get to safety," Ben urged, then was off again, firing line after line to reach those still inside. Across the street, hidden atop an opposite high-rise, a man in a black hood watched with a cold, measured gaze. A mask hid most of his face, but his eyes were hard and hungry. He trained a telescope on Ben's frantic rescue work, lips curving into a smile that was more malice than mirth. "Ha ha, Spider-Man," he murmured. The man, Angus, a member of a clandestine faction bent on chaos, loved this sight. Chaos fed him. He slid a small remote from his pocket, fingers dancing over the buttons while his gaze stayed fixed on Ben. If Spider-Man died here, the disorder would spread like wildfire. Below, Ben swung and dove through a ruined atrium, rescuing people and threading through falling debris. Concentration sharpened everything. Every move counted. Then his spider sense flared, an urgent, electric warning. His body reacted before thought, launching a web and twisting his trajectory in midair. On the rooftop opposite, Angus's grin widened. He pressed a red button. The building answered with a hellish roar. Explosions ripped through a floor just beneath the already burning level. Windows shattered in a cascading sheet. Glass shards became a lethal blizzard. Flames surged outward, and the blast's shockwave hammered into the air. Ben adjusted mid-swing, webbing and dodging with reflexive grace. Glass and embers slashed past him. He twisted his body, shielding civilians, using every ounce of skill to negotiate the carnage. From his vantage point in the smoke and debris, he could feel the anger building in his chest, an anger hotter than the flames. Angus watched, savoring the moment, convinced he controlled everything. He did not know that he had only stoked a fiercer fire inside Spider-Man himself. Chapter 191, Trial. When the explosion went off, Uncle Ben's spider sense flared. Through the smoke and glass, he caught a glimpse of a figure on the roof of the opposite building. Instinct told him that person had caused the blasts. If he didn't act, there would be more victims, innocent faces that haunted him, lives that might be snuffed out. Even if the chance of success was slim, Ben had to try. As Spider-Man, he felt responsible for the city. He threaded through the flames, dodging falling glass, and swung across to the other building. Heat licked at him with every leap, the air stung of smoke and burning. Nothing stopped him. On the rooftop, Angus saw the red and blue blur closing in, and panic flared in his chest. He had thought his plan was foolproof. Now the plan threatened to fall apart. He bolted for the stairs and then the elevator, heart racing. 2 minutes later, too slow, Spider-Man appeared behind him like a shadow. Angus darted into the elevator, but a web shot past him and latched to the frame, blocking the doorway. "Don't come any closer," he shouted, frantic. He held up a small device and snarled, "One step and I hit this. The bombs go off." Ben narrowed his eyes. "It was you. Do you know how many people you've killed, you monster?" Angus's grin was wild. "Don't think you can just web me and be clever about it. The second that remote leaves my hand, everything wired in this building detonates. How many do you think I buried? Huh, guess!" Ben tightened his hands into fists, anger and helplessness wrestling in him. Angus looked positively drunk on his own cruelty, eyes glittering with madness. "Spider-Man, leave. Go save the people you pretend to care about, or watch them die," he taunted. Ben's brain raced through options. If the remote truly needed to stay in Angus's hand, he couldn't risk any close contact, yet he also couldn't let more innocents die. If he could trap Angus instantly, bind him fast enough that the remote couldn't be used, he might get both. But Angus was alert and ready to lash out at any movement. There was no clean opening. A tremor of contempt cut through Angus's voice. "What? You don't believe me? Think this is a fake?" Before Ben could act, Angus thumbed the button. The building answered with a thunderous roar. Flames burst upward, smoke clawed across the sky, and a wall of heat hit the street below. The sound echoed like the gates of hell opening. No, Ben's shout was a raw, helpless sound. He felt his chest tightening as he watched the carnage. Angus's voice dropped to a cold, victorious rasp. "Get out of here, now, or more of them die." Ben looked at him, racked by fury and guilt. He knew he couldn't both stop this man and save the people inside. He took a breath, forced himself to step back, and turned away. Only when Ben's figure was gone did Angus allow himself a smile, one of triumph and scorn. He bolted for the elevator, found the bathroom on another floor, stripped off his cloaked clothes and mask, and slipped into ordinary clothes beneath. He practiced the motions like he'd done them 100 times, adjusting a pair of glasses, curling his mouth into an easy smile. The cold killer vanished, replaced by a sunny, clean-cut young man. "No one will find me now," he muttered, "not even Spider-Man." He walked toward the elevator, remote clutched in his hand, and merged into the flow of people. The first 3 floors of the building were shopping malls. Once he was among shoppers, he felt safe. He didn't notice the small mechanical spider that had crawled away minutes earlier, hidden on a windowsill. Ben hadn't been able to bring Angus in during the confrontation, but he hadn't left completely empty-handed. Before leaving the scene, he'd secretly released a tiny, high-tech spider, an Austin Group prototype, so realistic it could fool anyone. To the untrained eye, it looked exactly like a real spider, but its many eyes were high-precision cameras capable of tracking and transmitting movements. The little spy tracked Angus to the elevator. Angus climbed in and found a middle-aged man already there. He gave a polite smile and eased himself between shoppers, thinking himself invisible. He didn't realize the man watching him was Ben, without his costume. As the elevator doors began to close, Ben moved. He fired a web with a quick, practiced motion, wrapping Angus's wrists and torso so tightly the remote clattered from his hand to the floor. Angus's eyes went wide with shock and fury. He struggled, but the webbing held. "You," he spat, shock and rage mixing on his face. "Got you," Ben said coldly. Relief and resolve steadied his voice. This was the chance he had been waiting for, the man responsible for the explosions finally apprehended. Angus's face drained of color. He knew this time escape was impossible. Ben turned him over to the police and then pushed back into the inferno of the city, trying to pull survivors from the wreckage and tend to the injured. Guilt gnawed at him. If he'd found Angus sooner, fewer people would have died. All he could do now was try to make amends one rescue at a time. By evening, he was exhausted. He stumbled to his car, the night air cool and thin, the street lamps throwing weak pools of light. He opened the door and found Peter inside, calmly reading a book. Ben's apology tumbled out before he could stop it. "I'm sorry I'm so late, Peter. You must have been waiting." Peter looked up, smiled, and waved the book at him. "It's fine. I read in the car. I wasn't bored at all." Ben felt warmth at that. Peter's easy understanding washed some of the day's weight away. "Hungry? Let's find somewhere to eat." "Steak," Peter said immediately, eyes bright. Ben was smiling as he reached for the keys, until his phone rang. He answered, and his face went white as the voice on the other end spoke in a rush. "What? He was kidnapped?" After he hung up, Ben looked suddenly older. He gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles were white. Peter noticed the change and tried to keep things light. "It's okay, Uncle Ben. You do what you have to do. I should probably get my driver's license anyway." Ben took a breath and forced a smile. "I'm sorry, Peter. I might miss dinner tonight. I'll make it up. Steak, my treat." Peter nodded, still smiling. "It's okay. Go to your job. I'll get a taxi." Ben put a tired hand on Peter's shoulder. The boy had grown, independent and steady. "Thanks, Peter." He started the car and drove off, leaving Peter on the curb. Peter lifted his suitcase and watched him go, the smile fading. He hadn't wanted power or glory. He only wanted to help. I'll try to speed things up, he told himself quietly. Far below the city, in a dark underground sewer, Angus knelt on cold concrete, gasping. He stared up at the man cloaked in black who had spared him from prison, Priest Hansen. Thank you, Hansen, Angus whispered, trembling with relief. If it weren't for you and the priest, I would have gone to jail. Thank you. Priest Hansen's face was drawn under the hood. His voice was flat. We'll talk about thanks later. You failed your trial. What? No, I didn't fail, Angus protested, desperately. I caused chaos. Hundreds, thousands were affected. That had to count for something. Hansen shook his head. A grand performance requires a perfect ending. If the protagonist, the final prize, is seized, the gods do not reward the show. Understand? Angus slid forward and grabbed the priest's robes frantically. Please, give me another chance. I can do it better. There are no second chances for the trial, Hansen said. He exhaled, as if weighing something. But I knew your parents. I've watched you grow. I'm not entirely without mercy. Angus's eyes lit at the glimmer of hope. So, another trial? Hansen smiled thinly and shook his head. Not like that. He reached into his pocket and produced a small vial of dark, turbid liquid. Strange particles swirled inside it. Angus drew back, as if the sight made his throat dry. Drink this, Hansen said. It will let you advance to Sequence 8. Take it now. Its power fades with time. Relief and greed warred across Angus's face. He glanced around at the grim sewer and hesitated. Here. It's safe here, Hansen said simply. Angus unscrewed the cap with shaking hands and tipped the vial back. The liquid burned down his throat. He swallowed, desperate and triumphant, unaware of the shadow that passed over Hansen's expression. Hansen watched him with a hunger that went beyond satisfaction. Chapter 192, A Real Dream, Fifth Day. Steve sat back in his seat as the plane prepared to depart for the British Empire, eyes half closed. Beside him, Agent Sharon, beautiful, capable, and blonde hair pulled into a high ponytail, watched him with a look that was equal parts amusement and concern. Her blue eyes were clear as spring water as she tilted her head and asked softly, Captain, are you going to sleep through this whole 8-hour flight without saying a word to me? Steve exhaled and answered in a low, steady voice. I'm just conserving energy. I don't want to be caught off guard if something happens. There was the familiar steadiness in his tone, caution born of experience, and Sharon smiled, teasing him. You're always so serious. You should relax once in a while. Before she could say more, a commotion erupted at the aircraft door. Sharon's expression snapped alert. Captain? Steve opened his eyes and rose immediately. The two of them moved toward the disturbance with a practiced, automatic efficiency. A small crowd had gathered. Several attendants were trying to remove 3 half-grown children from the jet. One of the boys, handsome, terrified, was shouting at the top of his lungs, Get off the plane! Everyone will die! This plane is going to crash! The boy's voice shook with genuine fear. Steve studied his face and felt no malice, no calculated prank, only panic. He pushed through the crowd with Sharon at his side. Stop, he ordered. A young flight attendant glared at them. Who are you? Sharon produced her badge and showed it. FBI, what's going on here? The attendant's attitude shifted instantly. Her voice dropped to respectful concern. These kids are making a scene. They say the plane will have an accident. We're trying to handle it. Steve crouched to get on level with the boy who had screamed and asked gently, Kid, why do you say that? The boy's eyes flickered with fear, but Steve's calm presence steadied him. I had a dream, the boy stammered. A real dream. The plane crashed and everyone died. Steve looked to Sharon. We should look into it. Sharon nodded and addressed the attendant. Hold off on departing. We need to confirm a few things. Reluctantly, the crew complied. The children were escorted off the plane into a quiet departure lounge. Outside, the hum of engines continued. Inside, suspended silence. Steve and Sharon sat with the 3 kids and took them seriously. Steve introduced himself and Sharon, then asked each child their name in a slow, reassuring tone. My name is William, the first boy said, gripping the hand of a smaller girl beside him. The girl, pale, scared, looked to William for courage. This is Jenny, he added. Are you siblings? Sharon asked. No, William answered. Jenny crossed her arms and shot him a slightly embarrassed glance. He's my boyfriend, she blurted. Steve suppressed a smile at the kid's earnestness. The third boy, bespectacled and quiet, offered his name. I'm Clark. Steve turned back to William. So this wasn't a prank? No, it wasn't a prank. William spoke quickly, conviction ringing in his voice. I had the dream many times. Things from my dreams came true before. Is it possible it's just a coincidence? A memory blending with reality? Sharon suggested, trying to find a rational explanation. William shook his head vehemently. No, I didn't believe it at first either, but my dreams have gotten clearer. When I wake up, I remember everything. They're not made up. Jenny squeezed William's hand. I believe him, she said. He told me about things that happened, and they did happen. You shouldn't ignore us. Have someone check the plane. Clark added softly, I believe him too. Steve and Sharon exchanged looks. This felt like more than childish mischief. Sharon used her credentials to order a thorough inspection. The passengers were guided back to the lounge, while technicians combed the plane from nose to tail, inspecting the cabin, checking the instruments, scanning for suspicious devices, everything. The inspection team worked methodically and in silence. Minutes stretched into an hour. At last, an inspector called out, Here, there's an issue. They crowded around and found a nut on one of the wing panels had come loose. The chief inspector explained, if the aircraft hits severe turbulence at altitude, a loose fastener like this could become dangerous. We've tightened it now. Everything else checks out. Steve nodded and pointed at William. Thank you. The inspector went pale and then smiled uncertainly. Thank you, to you and the children. If this had failed, it could have been terrible. William and the others brightened at the recognition, but William still looked uneasy. I'm still worried. Can we switch planes? Of course, Sharon said without hesitation. We'll get you onto another aircraft. The airport staff quickly arranged alternate seats and upgraded service. Steve and Sharon accompanied the children onto the new flight, and for the first time since boarding, William allowed himself a relieved smile. The plane lifted off, the sky cleared, and sunlight streamed through the windows. Steve watched William and said a silent prayer for their safety. 2 hours later, the original aircraft, now deemed airworthy, took off again with its new set of passengers. The delay had passed, and the passengers tried to relax. Then the weather turned. Dark clouds loomed, lightning lashed, and thunder rolled. Mid-flight, a bolt of lightning struck one of the engines. There was a deafening explosion, the cabin lights flicked out, and violent shudders rippled through the fuselage. Fire flared and spread quickly around the engine housing. In a matter of moments, the aircraft was engulfed in flames, a blazing ball against the night sky. More than 200 people, including crew and passengers, were consumed in the disaster. Chapter 193, Accident. The plane touched down without incident. When the door opened and the passengers filed out, a breeze with a faintly foreign tang greeted them. For once, Steve felt in good spirits, bright and unusually carefree. They walked from the aircraft into the terminal, chatting and laughing. Steve pushed the luggage cart while talking with William. Sharon held Jenny's hand, calming the little girl's excited chatter. Clark walked a few paces behind, smiling. This is where we part ways. Enjoy your trip. Steve stopped, turned to William, and clapped a hand on his shoulder. William squeezed his hand back, warmth flooding through him. Thanks, Steve. If I ever have another dangerous dream, I'll call you. Steve made a phone call gesture with his hand. No problem. I'll be on standby. William hesitated. This farewell marked them heading in different directions, but he felt Steve's friendship steady him. Jenny hugged Sharon and beamed. Sister, you and brother Steve should have fun and become even sweeter and happier. Sharon laughed, ruffled the girl's hair, and replied, You take care and enjoy yourself with William and the others. Goodbye. William and the others waved and walked away. The clamor of the terminal faded. Steve and Sharon watched them go, then turned back into the business of their lives. They were trained operatives. The mission came first. Let's go, Steve said, and they headed to a nearby hotel. The building looked older, its interior rich with a quiet, antique elegance. After checking in, Steve handed Sharon a room card. It's 7. Rest for an hour, then come to my room at 8 and we'll go over the itinerary. Okay, she said. Sharon took the card, brought her luggage to her room, and, out of habit, did a thorough sweep. She inspected bedside tables, desks, lamps, every likely hiding place, making sure there were no bugs or cameras. Satisfied, she drew the heavy curtains to shut out the world, undressed, and filled the tub with hot water. The bathroom quickly clouded with steam. She washed her hair, then eased into the bath and let the warmth seep into her muscles. Eyes closed, she allowed herself to relax for the first time in a long while. As the steam rose and clung to the ceiling, it condensed on the exposed wiring running above the bathroom. Sharon didn't notice the tiny beads collecting there. When a faint spark jumped from the wire, she blinked and felt a twinge of unease. Before she could get out to check, a loud, heavy noise, like something big dropping, sounded from above. The impact sent a sharp vibration through the ceiling. A brittle wire snapped. A length of wire fell and landed across the exhaust fan. Metal ground on metal. The fan shorted and burst with a flash. Fan blades sheared loose and spun into the small tiled room. At the same moment, the light went out, plunging the bathroom into pitch black. Sharon's eyes dilated. Instinctively, she grabbed the bath towel beside her and, with a panicked swing, knocked one of the flying blades away just before it could nick her neck. The blade skidded off and slammed into the wall. Her heart hammered. She leaned on the tub's edge, trying to steady her breathing. That's when the bathtub, old and brittle, gave under her weight with a sharp, grinding crack. The rim splintered. Sharon pitched forward, out of the tub. She hit the floor, and a jagged piece of metal that had been standing upright, a broken support from the shattered tub, glinted dangerously close to her throat. A muffled groan escaped her. Pain shot through her ankle. She couldn't put weight on it. The lightless room felt unreal and dangerous. Outside, Steve heard the noise. His brow tightened. He set his coffee down and moved to Sharon's door, knocking urgently. "Sharon, you okay?" Silence answered. His pulse quickened. He knocked again, more forceful. "Sharon, respond!" Sharon took a deep breath and pushed herself up to answer, but the bathtub's collapse had left her half on the floor and in pain. She started to call out and then cried out as the pain increased. Hearing that, Steve didn't hesitate. He kicked the door hard. It burst open. He swept into the room and saw the closed bathroom door. He locked the bedroom door with a quick motion and then slammed into the bathroom. The sight that met him made him freeze. A towel draped over Sharon's body, her skin pale, chest heaving. "Sharon," he said, rushing to her. "I knocked. Why didn't you answer?" She clutched the towel to her chest, cheeks flushing. "I was going to." Her voice trembled. "You came too fast." A rush of relief washed over Steve when he saw she was alive. "Okay. Are you hurt?" Sharon's voice tightened. "I think I sprained my foot." She nodded toward the broken metal jutting up near her head. If she hadn't twisted as she fell, it could have been much worse. Now she couldn't stand. Steve's tone softened. "Then stay put. I'll help you up slowly." He scooped her up with careful hands, avoiding the towel, and carried her to the bed. Sharon leaned into him, warmed by his steadiness. He glanced away from the clothes strewn across the bed to give her some privacy. "I'll get a first aid kit." "There's one in my suitcase," she said. "I'll put it on the bed." "You packed a first aid kit?" he asked, half smiling. "Of course. Have you forgotten I'm a nurse?" Steve opened her suitcase and found the kit sitting on top. He took it without a word and began examining her injuries. Her right ankle was red and swollen, definitely sprained. Her other foot had cuts from the broken tub and was bleeding. "You're injured. This needs immediate care," he said, concern thick in his voice. Sharon nodded, trying to steady herself despite the pain. "Thank you, Steve. Can you help me onto the bed?" He treated her wounds with careful hands, cleaning and bandaging the cuts, wrapping the swollen ankle. Then he went into the bathroom to inspect the damage. The bathroom was a wreck. The exhaust fan had been shattered into scattered pieces. Tiles were peppered with black scorch marks where the motor had burned. A frayed wire dangled from the ceiling, still faintly sizzling. Steve switched on his phone light and examined the scene closely, but found nothing that suggested deliberate tampering. Everything looked old and dangerously worn, an accident in an ill-maintained room. Still, an uneasy knot sat in his gut. His phone buzzed. Steve glanced at the screen. "William calling," he answered. "Hey, William, it's Steve." On the other end, William's voice was raw, barely a whisper. "Steve, Clark, he's dead." "What?" Chapter 194, Death is Coming. The night felt hollow. Streetlights cast a weak, amber glow, and the world beyond them blurred into shadow. An ambulance idled at the curb. its red and blue lights blinking over the scene like a heartbeat. Even the wind seemed colder. William stood frozen at the roadside, eyes empty as doctors and nurses lifted a stretcher into the back of the ambulance. A white sheet covered the figure. Under it, he could just make out the shape of a person. A physical pain knotted his chest, an invisible hand squeezing him tight. The man beneath the sheet was Clark. They had been laughing together only an hour ago, talking about tomorrow's plans and the little things that meant everything. Now, Clark was gone. Jenny stood beside William, her face streaked with tears. She clung to his arm as if afraid he might vanish next. She knew William's grief ran deeper than her own. She held him, trying to pass along whatever comfort she could. A sleek black car screeched up and stopped. A handsome man and a woman stepped out, Steve and Sharon. Sharon hobbled on a cane. Steve had insisted she come and had driven them over as soon as he heard. Sharon, stubborn as ever, refused to stay behind, even though she was still recovering. They watched the ambulance doors close and the white sheet swallowed inside. Steve's expression was taut with concern. "William, what happened?" His voice low and urgent. William lifted his head, eyes rimmed with red, voice raw. "An accident. Clark was killed in an accident." "An accident?" Steve frowned. Again, his mind raced. A cold light flashed in his eyes. Sharon's face went pale. She gripped her cane so hard her knuckles whitened. She had only just survived a near-fatal accident herself. Now another had struck, too coincidental. "If this is another accident," Steve said softly, turning to William, "we need details." William drew a shaky breath and tried to gather himself. He replayed the hour before, voice slow and low. "We were out for a midnight snack. The night was clear, the moon bright. We were talking, joking, and then a sudden gust of wind hit, like something from nowhere. A large sign started to creak and came loose. It fell right on Clark." He choked on the last word. The image returned, Clark pinned beneath the heavy sign, blood spreading across the pavement, the metallic tang filling the air. Steve patted his shoulder and urged him on. "The police investigated," William said. "They say there was no sign of foul play. The screws had corroded, old and cracked, and the wind did the rest." Steve stared toward the street, where a dark stain still marred the pavement. His instincts rebelled at the explanation. "This doesn't feel like an accident," he said quietly, the unease in his voice growing. William looked at him, bewildered. Sharon stepped forward then, her voice low and steady despite the pallor of her face. "Not long ago I had my own accident," she said. "I nearly died." William noticed the crutch and the bandage around Sharon's ankle and felt the color drain from his face. "Are you saying someone's trying to kill us?" he asked, his voice trembling. Steve shook his head slowly. "Maybe not a human," he said. William and Jenny clasped each other's hands, both suddenly aware of how fragile they were. "Then what is it?" William whispered. Steve took a breath. "I don't know yet." Sharon pulled out her phone and scrolled through the news, fingers moving fast. Her expression grew sterner, then outright pale. She looked up at Steve. "There was a plane crash this morning," she said. "Everyone on board died." Steve and the others were stunned. "But the flight logs, weren't they checked? Wasn't the weather okay?" "They say a thunderstorm hit the flight," Sharon answered. But there was no storm in the forecast. Steve's jaw tightened. Connections formed too easily in his mind. A deadly plane accident that shouldn't have happened, Sharon's near-fatal incident, and now Clark crushed by a falling sign. An invisible pattern was taking shape. "I think you two should stay with us for the next few days," he decided. "We can't be apart right now." He drove William and Jenny back to their hotel, helped with their luggage, then led them to his suite. Sharon's room had a broken bathroom, so they all took shelter in Steve's room. It wasn't large, but it would hold 4. Steve made 2 steaming cups of hot water and set them in front of William and Jenny before taking a seat himself. Sharon sat on the edge of the bed and watched the young couple with maternal concern, understanding the strain they were under. William stared into the rising steam and spoke slowly. "Maybe this is because I changed the future," he said. "If I hadn't dreamed about the crash, we might have been on that plane. We changed something, but maybe changing it made us targets." Steve finished his thought. "So something is trying to force the future back to what it was, using accidents to kill those who were supposed to die." The idea settled over them like a chill. William pressed his fingers into his hair until it hurt. "What do we do?" he asked, panic flaring. "Are we really going to die?" He had once thought his ability to see bits of the future could save people. Now it felt like he had only delayed inevitable deaths. "I don't want to lose Jenny," he said, voice breaking, clutching her hand. Jenny sobbed and wrapped herself around him. "I don't want to be without you," she cried. Sharon moved closer and patted Jenny's back, her tone soft but firm. "We're not going to let that happen," she said. "I'm right here." "Even if death itself wants us, it can only strike by accident," Steve said, trying to steer the fear into resolve. "If we stay alert, we can reduce the risk." "How do we sleep then?" William asked. "We can't keep watch forever." "We'll take shifts," Steve said. "Someone always stays awake." Sharon added, "You two should sleep first. The two of us can sit up." They argued briefly. William and Jenny wanted to help share the burden, until exhaustion finally took over. They fell asleep in each other's arms, and Steve covered them with a blanket. He watched them, then took a chair. He and Sharon settled into a vigil, trading quiet glances and silent encouragement under a thin wash of moonlight. Hours passed. The night crept long and thin. Steve, on edge, got up when a soft sound fluttered in the room, like the curtains stirring. He checked the window and, finding only the calm night and a scattering of stars, relaxed and returned to his watch. Sharon whispered, "I didn't expect this to start before our mission even began. We can't hide in this room forever, can we? Out there is risk, sometimes unavoidable. A runaway truck, a falling sign, staying in a room isn't a cure." Steve nodded, though he was inwardly restless. He wanted to get on with their task, to do something rather than wait. In the silence of his mind, he spoke aloud to the presence that had guided him before. "Lord, do you have an answer?" he asked in his thoughts. A voice, calm and oddly unruffled, replied within his head. "You're on the right path. Survive 3 attacks from death, and you will be removed from its list. But each attack will be harsher than the last. The chances are the others won't make it. Do not waste time clinging to them. Leave them behind." 3 attacks, each stronger than the last? Even Sharon, a trained agent, had been hurt by the first. William and the others were ordinary. Steve swallowed hard and pleaded silently, "I can't abandon them. Is there any other way?" There was a pause. Then the voice offered an alternative, blunt and terrible. "If you cannot survive, you may substitute another life in your stead. Kill someone else to satisfy death's count, and you will be safe." Steve recoiled. Kill someone to save yourself? He couldn't accept that. The thought made his stomach twist. He refused, even in private. There was nothing more to say. For now, he would take things one step at a time. Chapter 195. Supplies. William woke as if pulled from a dream. His brow was knotted, he gave a soft hum, and his body trembled before he snapped fully awake. Last night's events rushed back, so real that he felt sobered in an instant. He turned to the woman sleeping beside him. Jenny's face was peaceful, showing none of the anxieties William still felt. He gently slipped her hand away so as not to wake her, then sat up. Warm sunlight filtered through the curtains and lit the room. Everything looked the same as the night before, as if they had simply spent a quiet Christmas Eve. Sharon sat on the sofa, smiling at him, though her eyes were rimmed with fatigue and worry. "It's still early," she murmured. "You can sleep a while longer." William rubbed his eyes, annoyed with himself. He'd meant to keep watch, he had insisted on it, but somehow he'd slept until dawn. "Early?" he protested. "The sun's up. Sharon, why didn't you wake me?" Sharon answered softly, a trace of teasing in her voice. "I told you guys not to worry about watching. We're used to staying up. You lot aren't." "I stay up late playing games all the time," William shot back, but his voice betrayed his concern. He leaned forward. "You didn't sleep through the night, did you? You should get some rest. And where's Steve?" Sharon shook her head. "I napped for a bit. Steve went out to get you some food." William's eyes widened. "He went out? Why risk it? We could have had the hotel bring food." Sharon's smile grew steadier and more confident. "Don't worry, the captain can handle himself." What she didn't say was that Steve had gone to fetch equipment that couldn't easily be carried on him. William still felt on edge. He trusted Steve, but the thought of him out there unnerved him. Sharon's voice, calm and unwavering, eased some of his worry. "He'll be back soon." Jenny stirred at the sound of voices and blinked awake. "William, Why are you up? She asked, still groggy. William smoothed her hair and gave her a reassuring smile. I woke up early. Go back to sleep a little longer. She nodded and lay back down. William watched her for a moment, warmth and a fierce sense of responsibility filling him. No matter what happened, he promised himself he would protect her. A soft knock sounded on the door. William and Sharon exchanged a glance. A thread of tension ran through them both. Sharon moved silently to the door and pressed an ear to it. Who is it? She called, keeping her voice low. It's me, Steve, came the familiar reply. Relief washed over Sharon's face as she opened the door. Steve stood there with a large bag, tired but smiling. Breakfast's ready. Come and eat, he announced as he carried the food in and set the bag on the table. For a moment, the anxiety in the room dissolved. Steve was the backbone of their makeshift team. His presence meant they were safe, at least for now. William nudged Jenny awake. Steve's back with breakfast. I'm starving, she said, brightening at the sight of food. Steve set another heavy bag on the table and without ceremony started pulling things out. Sharon sidled up and with practiced careful movements removed a pistol from the bag, double-checked that the safety was on, and tucked it into her pocket. Her hands were steady, but her eyes were guarded. She worried about an accidental discharge, so only agents carried firearms for now. The rest of the team relied on other protection. Steve continued unpacking. 4 walkie-talkies and 4 bulletproof vests he laid out on the table. He glanced at Sharon's leg and asked, concerned, You okay? Are you still limping? Much better, she replied with a shrug. At least I don't need a cane anymore. William bit into his burger and looked at the extra gear with surprise. You two aren't planning on being spies, are you? Sneaking into places, stealing intel. I've seen those movies. Steve laughed. Sorry to disappoint, William. We're just stocking up. Stocking up, indeed. Steve reached into the bottom of the bag and brought out a hard shield with a faded star on it. He held it like an old friend, a satisfied smile on his face. William practically dropped his half-eaten burger and rushed over. That's incredible. Captain America's shield. Steve, you must be a huge fan. You share his name and even have his shield. Steve glanced at Sharon, who was trying not to laugh, and shrugged. Guilty as charged. I'm a fan. Hey, nothing wrong with that, William said. I'm a fan too. Steve handed William a vest. Put this on. It'll keep you safe. Thanks, William said as he accepted it. Far across the Atlantic, another young man opened his eyes to a ceiling he didn't recognize. Parker blinked at the cracks like winding trails and felt disoriented. He had moved out of the old house he'd lived in for more than a decade and into a new rented place. The old house had been run down but warm, full of memories. This apartment felt strange and empty. The alarm clock shrilled in the quiet room. He turned it off and stood up. He washed his face with cold water, trying to clear his head. Looking at his reflection, he told himself today was the first day of living alone, time to pull himself together. In the kitchen, the refrigerator held almost nothing. He found an egg and decided to make the simplest breakfast he could manage. Cooking wasn't his forte. Aunt May had always handled most of the housework, so he concentrated hard. The egg hissed in the pan. He let his attention slip for a second, and one side browned too much. He rescued what he could, and though the plate looked messy and slightly burned, he tasted it and smiled. Not bad. He buttered some bread and poured a glass of milk. A modest, homemade breakfast. It felt like a quiet achievement. Sitting at the table in the empty apartment, Parker's thoughts drifted back to breakfasts with Uncle Ben and Aunt May, when the house had been full of life and laughter. Now he was alone. The loneliness pressed on him, the kind of hunger for connection that made people both crave and avoid others. So this is longing, he thought. He closed his eyes, and a subtle, unfamiliar energy unfurled inside him, warm and steady, flowing through him like a stream. It settled into every part of his body. When he opened his eyes, something inside him clicked into place. The potion he'd taken had been completely absorbed. When the potion is fully digested, you will feel a power you've never felt before. Parker sat at the kitchen table, fists clenched, those words from Priest Hansen still ringing in his ears. He could already feel it, a warmth spreading through his limbs, a strength that wasn't just physical, but something deeper, tugging at the edges of his soul. It was like a spring watering every bone and muscle. He breathed slowly, forcing himself to calm down as the sensation intensified. This was what Hansen had promised, an awakening, a connection to something larger. And after that would come the promotion he'd been chasing for so long. His heart hammered at the thought. Promotion meant more power, access to higher secrets, the kind of advancement he'd dreamed of 1,000 nights. He forced his excitement down, finished his breakfast in a rush, and cleared the dishes with brisk, efficient motions. Then he drew the curtains closed until the room was dark and calming, as if isolating himself from the world would help him focus on what was to come. Back in his bedroom, he slowly stripped off his shirt and lay down on the mattress. Compared to the gaunt boy he used to be, his chest was now muscled and strong. He placed his hand on the faint spiderweb scar etched across his sternum. It had always been there, a delicate, glowing pattern. As he concentrated on it, the mark pulsed, then flared a strange red. The light grew hotter and brighter until it bathed the whole room. Energy erupted from the mark and raced through him. His pulse quickened, and his blood felt as if it were boiling, every cell alive, calling for that power. He closed his eyes and let it move through him until he felt at one with the force itself. When he opened his eyes again, he wasn't in his bedroom anymore. A tower loomed ahead, its spire seemingly stabbing the sky. It rose from a bleak wasteland, cracked earth, a few withered tufts of grass, and a sky heavy with gray clouds split occasionally by lightning. The place smelled of desolation, the kind of scene that inspires awe and a cold, reverent fear. Standing there, Parker felt loneliness and strength like he'd never known. He understood quickly that this was not the waking world, but a spiritual plane, a projection of his inner self. This was the Shadow Wilderness, and here he would be tested. Only by passing could he be promoted and claim the greater power he sought. A strange charge thrummed through the air. He walked toward the tower. Each step felt weighted, declarative. At the base, the massive door groaned open, as if by invitation, and he walked inside without hesitation. The interior was dim, lit by a few flickering oil lamps. He climbed a spiral staircase to a second-floor doorway. He remembered this place. Long ago, he'd taken his first test here, drunk the Wanderer potion, and risen to become a Sequence 9 mysterious person. Now he faced the second test that could raise him to Sequence 8. Determination settled over him. He placed both hands on the door and pushed. A crack widened, and a brilliant light poured through, flooding his body. The brightness consumed his vision. He felt himself slip away. Time stretched and flattened, both an instant and an eternity. Then, in the gray hush, a voice he knew well called out. "Peter, Peter, wake up, you're going to be late." Late? The shadows around his vision yawned back like a tide, and reality reassembled. Uncle Ben stood over him, older, softer, the lines of age clear on his face. It was odd. He'd never seen Uncle Ben look like this before. Parker blinked and then, puzzled, asked, "Uncle Ben, why do you look older?" "Haven't I always?" Uncle Ben touched his own wrinkled cheek, as if amused at the question. "All right, quit joking and get up. Don't you have to visit a lab today?" "A lab?" Parker frowned. He should have been here for a test. No, he'd been in the tower. Test? The memory fogged like a dream. He clutched his head, trying to clear the cobwebs. But Uncle Ben's tone brooked no delay, and he rose quickly, almost leaping out of bed. Sunlight slid between the curtains and spotted the floor in warm patterns. Parker didn't notice at first that the shadow beneath his feet pulsed strangely. He washed quickly, caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror, tired, slightly hollowed, then dressed and hurried downstairs. Aunt May was in the kitchen, smiling like always, warm as spring sunlight. The smell of breakfast made his stomach rumble. "Peter, take these and eat in the car. We don't have much time," she said, handing him a neatly packed sandwich and a bottle of milk, worry in her eyes. "Thanks, Aunt May. I'll be right back," he said, taking the bag. "Go on. Your uncle's waiting." Her voice held that patient urgency that meant both caring and a quiet fear. Outside, the morning air was cool and fresh. The street had come alive with people. A few birds called overhead. When he reached the car, Uncle Ben sat behind the wheel, smiling as Uncle Ben always did when he wanted to hide worry behind kindness. "Hop in, Peter. Time waits for no one," he said, wrapping the car hood with a knuckle. Peter climbed in and opened the sandwich bag. The sandwich smelled of home, and he took a bite as the car eased into traffic. He ate while watching the city slide by, storefronts, cyclists, other early commuters, and let the steady movement soothe him. "Where are we going?" he asked when he'd finished. "Columbia. You wanted to visit the biology lab, didn't you? You told me last night to wake you early." Uncle Ben glanced at him with a faint reproach. "You're running late." Peter's brow nodded. "Columbia? But didn't I get a job at the Austin Group lab already?" Uncle Ben laughed. "Work? Peter, you're excited. You probably dreamed about it last night. Remember, you're still a high school kid." "Was it a dream?" Peter's frown deepened. "So you're not Spider-Man?" He tried to joke, and Uncle Ben's confusion turned to amused laughter. "Spider-Man? Me with 8 legs? You watch too many movies, kid." Uncle Ben's laughter was contagious, and Parker found himself smiling, the tightness in his chest loosening. He stared out the window as the city sped by. A strange mixture of contentment and unease knotted in him. The images from the tower kept replaying like a clipped scene from a film. Maybe it had been a vision, maybe nothing more than a dream triggered by the potion. He couldn't tell which left him feeling oddly unmoored. "Peter, what's on your mind?" Uncle Ben asked gently. Parker hesitated. "If it was a dream, can I start over? Do it again?" Uncle Ben smiled, steady and reassuring. "Every day can be a new beginning, Peter. Whether it's dream or reality, you face it with heart and effort, and you'll find your way." His words eased something inside Parker. The car turned onto Columbia's campus, students threading sidewalks and the early sun gilding old brick. Uncle Ben cut the engine and patted Peter's shoulder. "Here we are." Peter took a deep breath, nodded, and stepped out onto the campus, ready, whatever this day might bring, to find out which of his realities was real. End of chapter. Chapter 197. Desire outside the gate of Columbia University, Peter Parker picked out his classmates at a glance. The sun warmed his face, and a pleasant, almost giddy feeling rose in him. Familiar faces passed before his eyes like a vivid painting. For some reason, he felt unexpectedly happy, as if he were meeting old friends after a long time away. He walked over quickly, smiling broadly. "Hey, Thompson, long time no see." He clapped Lightning Thompson on the shoulder with an easy familiarity. Thompson and his buddies looked startled, taken aback by Peter's casual friendliness. Peter didn't linger. After a quick greeting, he moved on. Thompson watched his back with a scowl and muttered to his friends, "What's up with that guy? Why isn't he scared of us?" A tall classmate nearby shrugged and sneered, "Maybe you didn't teach him a good enough lesson, Lightning." Thompson's glare turned cold. He clenched his fists and spat, "Humph, I'll teach him." Peter never noticed the hostility. He kept greeting people as he walked, one of them Jessica. He offered his hand with a smile. "Hey, Jessica, it feels like it's been ages." Jessica blinked, surprised, pointed at herself, and asked, "Are you talking to me?" Peter grinned, a little sheepish. "Yep, who else would I mean? Is there another Jessica hiding around?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "No, but you seem different from the Peter as know. He's usually quiet and kind of shy." Peter's smile softened. "People change. I guess I'm trying to be more outgoing." Jessica studied him with a new curiosity. She didn't press it, but she found herself looking forward to getting to know this version of Peter. After they gathered, the group headed to the laboratory. Everyone looked excited, especially Peter. When the lab door opened, the high-tech instruments, the blinking lights, and the busy researchers felt like a scene from a movie. He remembered the dream, too. The one where Uncle Ben had been bitten by one of the lab's loose spiders and become Spider-Man, and a small pang of regret passed over him. He'd laughed in the dream at how real it felt, but a sliver of doubt remained. What if some of it wasn't just a dream? Inside the exhibit, small, brightly colored spiders were kept in glass enclosures. Each one had a different pattern or hue, almost like miniature works of art, beautiful and dangerous. People took pictures. Peter took out the camera Uncle Ben had given him and photographed the spiders carefully. Then he noticed one incubator was empty. A spider had escaped. A strange tug of desire pooled low in his chest. He couldn't name it. Curiosity, something darker, some drawn compulsion, and felt both unsettled and strangely thrilled. He didn't notice the tiny red and blue spider that drifted down from the ceiling on a near-transparent strand until it landed on his forearm and bit him. The bite stung, and, almost instantly, a heat spread through him. The venom slid into his bloodstream and he felt his body convulse. His senses blurred, his skin went pale. Peter asked the teacher in charge for permission to go home. The teacher agreed when he saw how ill he looked. He stumbled back to his apartment. He said nothing to Aunt May and collapsed on his bed. While he slept, he dreamed vividly of moving between skyscrapers, feeling wind tear past his face as if he were a real spider swinging through the city's steel canyons. When he awoke, everything had changed. His senses were razor sharp. His muscles sang with power. Sounds and smells came at him with a new clarity. The distant rumble of traffic, the whisper of leaves outside his window, even the comforting aroma of Aunt May cooking in the kitchen. He felt strength in every limb, his nerves humming with unfamiliar precision. He tested himself and discovered he could jump impossibly high, cling to surfaces, and launch sticky webs to swing between buildings. A faint, prickling warning would tell him when danger loomed. That day marked the beginning of a life he could never have imagined. By night, he fashioned a suit in the corner of his small apartment and took to the rooftops, using webs to travel across the city. He rescued people, stopped robberies, and became a whispered rumor and then a name, Spider-Man. By day, he remained an ordinary student. By night, he was the guardian of the streets. But power brought pain as well as praise. Uncle Ben died at the hands of a criminal, and Peter would never stop blaming himself. He had let a chance to stop that man slip away. He had failed to act when it might have made a difference. And Ben took his last breath in Peter's arms. The words that echoed through him forever were simple and terrible. With great power comes great responsibility. Grief hollowed him out. He spent one night sobbing until his clothes and pillow were wet. He knew his life was irrevocably altered. After college, he went to the State University of New York, where he met people who would shape his life. The easygoing, wealthy Harry Osborn, the bright, perceptive Gwen Stacy, and Mary Jane, the red-haired beauty whose smile set his heart racing. But tragedy and loss kept following him. Gwen fell, thrown from a tower by the Green Goblin, and Peter could not save her. He held her as she died, and rage consumed him. In the battle that followed, he killed the Green Goblin, later learning the villain was Norman Osborn, Harry's father. Harry could not accept his father's death and turned on Peter, believing him the murderer. Their friendship shattered under the weight of betrayal and grief. Time and duty reshaped Peter's choices. He gave up a promising research career and became a reporter so he could be more available to protect the city. His responsibilities drove a wedge between him and Mary Jane. She could not bear the impossible demands of loving a man who lived two lives. The same year Aunt May passed away, and Peter was left alone again, worn down by grief after grief. At 40, Peter stood before a mottled mirror in his small rented room. The man in the glass had a lined, weathered face, the marks of years and battles and long nights. His eyes carried fatigue and a dull resignation. The certainty he'd once held seemed to be crumbling under time's steady weight. He took a breath and tried to steady himself. For a moment, the man in the mirror shifted. The reflection looked 20 years younger, the eager young student who had first dreamed of doing something extraordinary. The younger Peter, bright-eyed and defiant, asked quietly, almost taunting, "Do you regret it, Peter? Do you regret becoming Spider-Man?" Middle-aged Peter felt a tangle of emotions. He nodded, then shook his head and answered hoarsely, "I regret, not that I became Spider-Man. I regret not being stronger." Pain softened into anger as he spoke. If he had been stronger, he thought, he might have saved Ben, Gwen, Mary Jane. Why hadn't he been more? The thought gnawed at him until he felt consumed by it. He shouted aloud, a sound full of the decades of loss he carried, as if he wanted to tear away the years that had hollowed him. Heat suddenly flared in his chest. He looked down and, to his astonishment, saw a spiderweb pattern crawling across his skin as if it were alive. The pattern shimmered and pulsed beneath his fingers. A jolt of unfamiliar power slid through him when he touched it, and a mad, relieved laugh escaped him. "Ha ha ha! So that's it. This is real. This is my dream, my test." As he laughed, everything around him seemed to shatter like glass. The mirror exploded into fragments, and the room dissolved. He found himself standing before an old laboratory workbench, strewn with odd materials and instruments, a scene that resembled the place where he had first tested himself. He knew, with an odd, calm certainty, that he had passed whatever trial this was. He hadn't seen this as a test before, but he understood now. He was no longer the same person as before. Chapter 198, Gold Diggers. Parker stood in the ancient stone chamber, eyes glazed with the weight of everything he had just experienced. The walls were carved with runes that glowed faintly blue. A slow, cool light pulsed along the grooves. The air smelled faintly of herbs, oddly calming. He ran his fingertips across the cold stone, as if to prove to himself that he was still real. "Thank God, that was only a test," he whispered, letting the words echo in the empty room. Memories flashed through him like lightning, painful, vivid scenes that felt all too real. Losses, betrayals, the kind of despair that could have broken him. For a moment, Parker felt the old terror rising again. Then he forced himself to breathe and remember the truth. Those horrors had been illusions. In reality, Uncle Ben and Aunt May were alive and well. The thought brought tears to his eyes. The memory of Uncle Ben's patient smile and Aunt May's steady presence calmed him in a way nothing else could. He thought of Gwen Stacy and Mary Jane, two people who had mattered so much in different ways. Gwen's gentle intelligence, Mary Jane's warmth and fire. He didn't know if either existed in this version of his life, or which one he would see first. It was a headache-inducing problem, but a pleasant one compared to the nightmares he'd just endured. And then there was Anna, unpredictable, maddening at times, yet caring in her own chaotic way. She tugged at him more than he wanted to admit. Parker shook his head to clear it. He could wrestle with heart matters later. Right now, the only thing that mattered was promotion. On the lab table before him, strange materials glowed softly. The formula to synthesize the advancement potion, what would turn him into a higher sequence, had filled his mind while he passed the test. The method was clear. The work was mechanical, if delicate. He closed his eyes, inhaled, and began. He took a silver leaf first, soft and almost warm, and cut it into tiny pieces, dropping them into a clear glass bottle. Next came a blue crystal, speckled like the night sky. He smashed it with a hammer until it was powder and added it to the bottle. A red feather, as light as silk and tremulous as if it might take flight, was sliced into fine threads and added. Finally, he produced a single drop of purple liquid that shimmered in the light and let it fall into the mixture. He capped the bottle and shook. The components responded. The shredded silver leaf, blue crystal fragments, feather strands, and purple drops swirled together, and the liquid inside began to glow with iridescent colors. A floral, force-like scent rose from it, strange and comforting. Parker poured the mixture into a small cup. It spiraled into a tiny vortex, bright as a galaxy. He closed his eyes, muttered a silent prayer, and drank. At first it was ice cold, like mountain water, searing away fatigue and pain. The cooling spread through his veins, and he felt a blissful release. Then the bliss was replaced by a roaring inferno. Energy surged through him, 1,000 currents racing through his blood. Heat flared inside him as if something burned beneath his skin. He clamped his teeth and held on, sweat beading on his brow. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the cup. His heart pounded so hard, each beat felt like a hammer stroke, each one a new wave of agony. Lights exploded across his vision in brilliant colors, dancing into patterns that threatened to swallow him. It felt like an invisible hand had reached into his skull and was twisting. For a long, grueling stretch, he was consumed by that violent transformation. Eventually, the pain ebbed. His breathing steadied. He opened his eyes, and everything snapped into crystalline clarity. He could see the dust motes in the chamber as if they were islands on a map. His hearing sharpened. He could pick out the whisper of wind through leaves outside, the faint trickle of a distant stream. Strength hummed in his limbs. His muscles felt denser, faster, ready to explode into motion. He knew, with a quiet surge of victorious relief, that he had advanced. He was now a Sequence 8 gold digger. The benefits were immediate and obvious. As a gold digger, his senses were heightened beyond normal human limits. Vision and hearing had become precise tools, subtle shifts in the environment registered instantly. More importantly, he now had two active skills. The first, treasure hunt, allowed him to sense nearby valuables, ancient artifacts, buried relics, rare herbs, an invisible pull guiding him toward hidden riches. The second, extraction, Let him pull useful components from non-living materials, though the process required time. He could now harvest rare ingredients for potions or draw out metals and minerals for crafting. He exhaled slowly and considered what it meant. These abilities were perfect for seeking treasure, but he lived in a modern city. Opportunities to use treasure hunt and extraction felt limited. What he really wanted were offensive skills, ways to fight and protect Uncle Ben and Aunt May if a real threat appeared. He had endured too many simulated threats to believe all future dangers would be illusions. "It's okay," he told himself. "I can keep advancing." The hunger for power tightened in him. Some things you only miss after you lose them. Some strengths you only want after feeling helpless. He looked around the rune-lit chamber with a new resolve. He would return. He promised himself he would come back for the next promotion. In a lavish villa, sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows and bounced off crystal chandeliers into 1,000 brilliant shards. In the private gym, a broad-shouldered man stood before a huge mirror, lifting a 2-ton dumbbell with one hand. He was Jin Bing, the man who had escaped from the military base, and although he'd gotten leaner, he was every bit as powerful as before. He lifted the weight smoothly, barely showing effort, an expression of calm satisfaction on his face. Beside him stood Mai Juo, graceful and poised, a white towel draped around her neck. She watched him with a mixture of deference and admiration. Mai Juo was one of Jin Bing's most trusted aides. The door burst open. A gaunt, balding elder with a sour expression stepped in. Frank, an overseer from Hydra, responsible for ensuring Jin Bing carried out orders. His voice was a rough bark. "Jin Bing, it's been too long. I'm ordering you to complete the mission we assigned by tomorrow." Mai Juo flinched and took a step back. Jin Bing didn't like being spoken to like that, especially not by someone from Hydra. A flash of cold slid across his face. Slowly, expression unreadable, Jin Bing lowered the dumbbell. He flexed his free thumb, then opened his hand. A small mechanical device perched at his fingertips hissed and ejected. An airburst projectile launched with surgical precision. It struck Frank in the head. The impact was instantaneous and gruesome. Blood spattered, and Frank's body crumpled. Mai Juo's eyes widened. She bowed her head slightly, respect and fear warring on her face. The room felt colder, charged with an unspoken warning. Jin Bing's voice was soft, almost casual. "I won't be ordered around." Mai Juo lowered her gaze, the awe in it edged with the knowledge that this line of work had a price. End of chapter. Chapter 199, Kingpin's Actions. Inside the villa, the bald old man's outburst had faded, and a heavy silence fell as if none of it had ever happened. Kingpin moved slowly to Mai Juo's side, took the towel from her hand, and brushed the sweat from her palms with the careful, almost ceremonial precision of a man used to having things done his way. He tossed the towel aside. It landed over Frank's prone body, concealing the mess. "You've got one thing wrong," the Kingpin said, low and cold. "No one gives me orders. I only do what I choose." His voice cut through the room like a blade. He turned to Mai Juo, eyes glinting with expectation. "Have you found the person I asked for?" Mai Juo took a breath, nerves tingling, then nodded. "I have." Her voice trembled with the excitement she could no longer hide. A satisfied curl of a smile crossed Kingpin's face, his gaze sharpened with a familiar, terrible hunger. "Good." He ground his teeth, and hatred spilled through his next words. "Harry Osborn. We'll meet soon." Every syllable seethed with the pain and fury Kingpin had bottled up for years. He blamed Harry for the chain of events that left him in the hands of the military. Captured, experimented on, the nights of darkness and scars on his body. Worse, while Kingpin suffered, Harry had claimed the fame and glory that should have been his, appearing in the media as the hero Kingpin should have been. The image of Harry celebrating in the spotlight made Kingpin's anger erupt like a volcano. Even without Hydra's interference, he told himself, he would have escaped and taken his revenge. He had rehearsed that day in his head 1,000 times, down to the smallest detail. "Heh," he added, an edge of madness in his smile. "I hope he's not in some coma, as they said. That would make things boring." "Prepare a car," he ordered Mai Juo. "I'm going out. I want to meet them." "Yes," Mai Juo replied instantly, heart pounding. A storm was coming, and she would be in the center of it. Far below the city, in a dark, damp underground sewer, water dripped with a slow, maddening rhythm. The air was stale and rotten, like a place long forgotten. A thin rat skittered through the pipes, whiskers trembling, eyes wide with fear. Before it reached safety, a shape flashed from the shadows and snatched it up. The rat was in a grip of cold, scaled fingers. The creature that caught it stood upright on two legs, a lizard man, brown scales gleaming, teeth and claws sharp. Its eyes were predatory and focused, as though every inch of this subterranean world belonged to it. It swallowed the rat in one gulp and growled softly. 7 or 8 more lizard men lurked in the corners, their gazes mostly wild and animal. But whenever they turned toward the green figure in the white coat surrounded by machines, their faces softened with awe. That figure was Dr. Connors, the lizard, once human, now something else. Since his transformation, he had been convinced that lizard kind should rule. He believed lizard men were stronger, better adapted to a harsh world than fragile humans. He had stolen advanced equipment from research institutes, set up a secret laboratory in the waterway, and devoted himself to turning humans into lizard men. The lab buzzed with machines, test tubes bubbled. Dr. Lizard was bent over a giant microscope, studying a single drop of blood with fanatic intensity. His eyes burned with purpose. Nothing mattered more than his research, but he'd failed repeatedly. Time and again, Spider-Man and Black Cat had sabotaged his plans. Spider-Man, in particular, seemed to ruin every perfect scheme. Rage and a hunger for revenge thrummed through Dr. Lizard's nerves. "Damn Spider-Man," he muttered. "This time I will beat him." He picked up a vial of his latest serum and painted it across his claws. The liquid shimmered with an eerie light, promising power. Dr. Lizard approached a slumped, homeless man, face hard with resolve. With a quick scratch, he drew blood and let the serum seep in. Minutes later, the man convulsed, bellowed with a sound not quite human, and scales began to sprout along his skin. He tore away his clothes and rose transformed, another lizard man. Dr. Lizard looked at his new creation with pride, but his brow furrowed. The conversion was effective, but slow. He wanted contagion, something that spread like a plague. He needed the process to be faster and more infectious. Before he could ponder further, everything in the lab began to tremble. Glass and metal collided in a cacophony. The ground groaned. Dr. Lizard's eyes widened as ceiling cracks spidered outward, racing across the concrete. With a thunderous roar, the overhead wall collapsed. Debris rained down. Dr. Lizard lashed his tail through the cloud of rubble, sweeping aside chunks that would have destroyed his equipment. He fought to protect years of stolen work, things he would not let be ruined. Then sunlight poured through a gaping hole above for the first time in that place, stabbing into the darkness like a blade. At the lip of the new opening stood a tall figure backlit by the sun, haloed and immovable. To Dr. Lizard, he looked like a god. The lizard's gaze met the newcomer's cold eyes and shrank. This was dangerous. "Who are you?" Dr. Lizard asked, voice low and wary. "My name is Kingpin," the man said, "and you must be Dr. Lizard." "Kingpin?" Dr. Lizard sneered, disdain laced with guarded fear. "Never heard of him." There was defiance in the words, but his body tensed. "Now you have," Kingpin replied. He fixed Dr. Lizard with a look that brooked no nonsense. "I'll say this once, surrender to me or die." "Humph," Dr. Lizard spat. "You think to make me your servant, human?" Before the insult finished his lips, Kingpin moved like a striking force. In an instant, he was upon Dr. Lizard, faster than the eye could follow. The punch that followed carried the kind of force that rearranged air. Dr. Lizard felt the impact as a crushing weight to his chest and was hurled backward into the wall. Stone cracked and fell away. He struggled to pull himself up, breath seared from his lungs. Anger flared in his eyes, but beneath it was something stranger. Fear. He had never met an opponent like this. Kingpin's power was beyond anything he had imagined. "Who are you?" Dr. Lizard gasped, voice shaking. "I am something you cannot defy," Kingpin said, disdain and authority coiled into the words. "Now tell me your choice." In the end, the defiance that had always fueled him crumbled under the sheer absolute force of the man before him. Possibilities flickered through Dr. Lizard's mind and fell away, impotent. He bowed his head. "I will surrender," he said at last, voice low and hollow with humiliation. Kingpin's lips curved in a small, approving smirk. "Very good. A wise choice. Now come with me." Dr. Lizard exhaled and replied simply, "All right." Chapter 200. Invincible Dr. Lizard had been only the first recruit Kingpin wanted. Fisk's plan reached far beyond a single mad scientist. He needed more brilliance, more power to build his kingdom. Dr. Lizard's defection was only the beginning. Next on his list was another scientific genius, Dr. Otto Octavius. At that moment, Octavius was trapped in a different kind of prison. He had stolen a fortune, but without the right channels, he couldn't obtain the rare elements his controlled nuclear fusion experiment required. He felt like an octopus pinned to the ocean floor, restless, anxious, even contemplating a desperate raid on the Osborne building to seize the components himself. The night before Octavius intended to act, Kingpin brought Dr. Lizard to a secret laboratory. Mechanical tentacles hovered and hummed through the air, a low, metallic buzz that spoke of power and impatience. Kingpin moved into the lab with the same measured, intimidating presence he always carried. He knew a man like Octavius, an idealist wrapped in genius, wouldn't be convinced by muscle alone. He needed a subtler approach. "Dr. Otto Octavius," Kingpin said, his voice deep and commanding. "I know the position you're in." Octavius turned. His mechanical arms flexed faster behind him, an outward sign of the tension he felt. "Who are you? How did you find me?" Kingpin smiled slightly. "I'm Wilson Fisk. I can help you make your dream real. Join me, and I'll put my resources at your disposal. I'll get you the elements you need. I won't interfere with your work." There was surprise and then suspicion in Octavius's eyes. His fingers tapped the lab bench, the tentacles stilled as if weighing Kingpin's words. "Can you really get them? You won't hinder my experiments?" "Of course not," Kingpin said, steady and sincere. "Controlled fusion is a grand ambition. I respect that kind of talent." Those words touched Octavius. After a long moment, he nodded. "All right, I'll join." Kingpin allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. With Octavius on board, his force had grown considerably. But the next target on his list would be unlike any before, an alien. He had never dealt with something truly alien, and the unknown both stirred his curiosity and challenged his appetite for conquest. A few hours later, in a small town near New York, the afternoon sun broke through thin clouds and warmed the busy streets. Among the bustle, a middle-aged woman stepped from a car with a hollow expression. Her movements were stiff, her eyes unfocused, as if she moved out of sync with the world. She drifted toward a seafood restaurant where lobsters and crabs were displayed live, attracting hungry patrons. Something in the woman fixed on the largest lobster. She walked slowly over, ignoring the curious looks. Without hesitation, she grabbed the crustacean and, to the horror of onlookers, bit into it like it was nothing, tearing through hard shell with wet, crunching sounds as blue blood sprayed out. Bystanders recoiled. A young waiter spluttered, "Hey, that needs to be cooked!" The woman looked up, and a flash of silver gray passed behind her eyes. A thick, silver-gray tentacle shot from her arm like a striking snake and impaled the young man through the chest. Blood spouted. He was lifted, choked, and fell lifeless to the floor. Screams filled the restaurant. Panic spread. Through the chaos, a deep engine growl drew nearer. A black luxury car rolled up and stopped. The door opened, and a broad, imposing man stepped out in a black suit, Kingpin himself, every inch the immovable force. He was followed by two unusual companions, Dr. Lizard, scales glittering, and Dr. Octavius with his mechanical arms flexing like living things behind him. Kingpin surveyed the carnage with an untroubled stare, as if the spilled lives were nothing more than swept leaves. His gaze fell on the woman, and he smirked. "You're Riot, aren't you?" The woman's face went hard. Something dangerous glinted in her eyes. Her voice came out low and rough. "Did you come to see me, Fisk?" Riot, the alien symbiote, had been inhabiting that woman. After its last battle with Jessica, host to Venom, it had been blasted into the river and later reclaimed another human. Along the way, it learned that its comrades had been captured, and Riot had been consumed by rage and hunger for revenge. Now it had finally reached the New York area, intent on settling scores and reclaiming its strength. Kingpin seemed to read Riot's thoughts and spoke with amusement. "I've seen the footage of your fights. You're formidable on the screen, but let's see about in real life." He let a provocational smile curl. "They say you grow stronger the more powerful the host you take. Why don't you try the Lizard?" Riot's attention flicked from Octavius to Dr. Lizard. It sensed the prodigious vitality in Lizard's body. Dr. Lizard himself sneered at the woman, contempt in every line of his face. I don't think she's that strong. Beat me first, then we'll talk. With a snarl, he lunged. Lightning-fast claws flashed. Riot answered in a rush of silver-gray mucus that burst from the woman and enveloped her, transforming her shape. Where a woman had stood there arose a towering creature draped in slick, metallic scales. The two monsters met with the sound of bone and metal colliding. Dr. Lizard slashed, claws cutting the air, but Riot wrapped tentacles around him and hurled him like a rag doll. He leapt back up and charged again, claws aimed for Riot's chest. Riot's arms shifted into massive hammer-like clubs and smashed down, sending Dr. Lizard crashing backward. The ground itself cracked under the force. Dr. Lizard spat blood in shock, eyes burning with rage. He had been overpowered. Kingpin watched without intervening, expression unreadable. Dr. Octopus stood nearby, arms folding and unfolding in idle curiosity. He seemed concerned only with the success of his experiment, not the spectacle of battle. Riot pummeled Lizard again and again, until the smaller creature lay broken on the earth. Then Riot flowed, silver-gray mucus slithering and surging, onto Dr. Lizard's body, seeping into every wound. Lizard's face twisted as the alien flooded him. The symbiote wormed through his flesh and bonded, merging with the reptilian host. A new voice rose, Lizard's criminal, hissing at first, then melting into something deeper as Riot's presence flooded the mind. Damn you, Kingpin, the voice rasped, threaded with other, stranger sounds. You will pay for your arrogance. I am, already, invincible. The declaration echoed as the alien lizard form rose, renewed and terrifying. Kingpin's smile didn't quite falter. He had sought strength, and now something had answered. But even he, who measured risk and reward like currency, took in the sight and understood that this was no longer simply a matter of recruitment. This was a new weapon, unpredictable and enormous. And as Riot's laughter, part reptile growl, part alien hiss rattled the air, the three men watched the future of Fisk's plans shift into a far more dangerous direction. End of chapter.